Today, I'm going to tell the story in a slightly different way because we're going to go back in time, then move forward in time, which went back, so that in the future we stay in the present, folks. So leave a like here, and off we go. We will start here in the final dungeon where the fight against the demons was happening. The humans were at a disadvantage, so they preferred to run. They couldn't even think of stopping, otherwise, they wouldn't be forgiven. However, even running non-stop, they realized it wouldn't work for them. It's impossible to run from these monsters. It would have been impossible if their leader hadn't stopped to face the creatures. So the guys, all in shock, asked what he thought he was doing, and the only thing he said was, "When you return home, write a book about my story as a great man." Now let's go back a bit in the past to find out how this happened, folks, to understand that humanity had no idea that humans weren't the only ones who evolved on Earth, because there existed the underground civilization. They were kind of humans or monsters who lived beneath the ground, and with their appearance, humanity was on the verge of extinction. Humans even began to try to counterattack, but no human weapon caused any damage to the underground beings. These beings had mythical powers that simply obliterated humanity more and more. However, the mythical powers of the underground beings began to affect humans, and a small number of humans affected by this power soon became superhumans, thus acquiring sufficient power to start counterattacking the underground. After defeating underground dungeons one after another, humanity began to regain hope until the big day arrived, folks, the day of the final dungeon. In the spring of 2005, the 7 strongest superhumans in the world gathered and initiated an attack on the final dungeon, thus ending this long war. For having accomplished this feat, they became known as the 7 heroes who saved humanity. Great wealth and much fame were given to them, but there was one person who did not return. Seo Muniap, the leader of the 7, was the only one who did not enjoy all this success. The living heroes became stars, and the fallen hero became a legend. Yes, at least they built a giant statue in honor of the great leader Seo Muniap. With that, 17 years passed, and currently, the International Battlefield Championship was taking place, South Korea against France. However, South Korea couldn't even react because there was a player named Nathan who was single-handedly defeating all the South Korean players. The guy was a real monster, and so far, he had already eliminated 6 players solo, which was the subject of many comments among the commentators. But there was still a player on the field for the South Korean team, Baek Haeyeon. Even with little chance of victory, she charged toward Nathan, and she was quite skilled. But have you ever seen someone with that deadfish look lose a one-on-one combat, folks? Even though Haeyeon was the daughter of one of the 7 heroes, she didn't stand a chance against the skillful Nathan. Yes, South Korea was defeated, with the MVP being the French player Nathan, with 7 solo kills out of the total of 11 players they had. The guy is really a machine in the game. And of course, this generates a lot of disappointment for the Korean people since 17 years ago they had people like Seo Muniap and Baek Jiho, some of the 7 heroes and the strongest in the whole world. For those who still didn't understand, they created this game called Battlefield since there are no more underground beings to pass the time and continue using the abilities they gained. And this guy here is the coach of the South Korean team and one of the 7 heroes, friend of the leader who stayed behind to be finished in the dungeon, Baek Jiho. And yes, everyone is irritated because Korea no longer has the strength it had before, and it's at this moment that memories and longing for their former leader come, folks. If he were still here, would things be different? How would things be if the great hero were still among us? That's what Jiho thought. And even a guy comes and telling him to go to the interview. Jiho replies that he doesn't care anymore, and that he's going to resign. Everything was heading in that direction until someone calls him, and it's none other than the president of the association. Jiho thought it would just be another scolding, but the president asks if he's aware of the news. And of course, if it's about the defeat, Jiho knows. Baek Jiho witnessed it just now. But it's not about that. So what's it about then? It's about the return of Seo Muniap, the legendary hero. The guy freezes instantly. And there in the city center, this person is falling from the sky, folks, falling right toward the statue of Seo Muniap, the man who sacrificed himself for the world 17 years ago. It's him, as you might imagine. Yes, Seo Muniap is back and more alive than ever. But now I'm curious, right? Did he revive just to participate in the game? Because if so, my question now is whether he can solo Nathan, who seems to be using hacks, because that guy is tough. I admit I'm curious. Directly into the dungeon where the protagonist was left behind. Well, at least this work broke the cliché of the protagonist being betrayed by his best friend. Here he simply chose to stay behind, and that's that. At that moment, he was surrounded by demons. However, this hero was really a powerhouse, but there were so many creatures coming. And guess what? He managed, just like the swinging boy, to pull his weapon out of his spatial inventory. Our protagonist, with determination in his eyes, after much effort and fighting, finally sealed the dungeon door. I just didn't quite understand why it seemed like there was a guy behind him in the dungeon. Could that guy be some kind of god or the creator of these powers? Some kind of player with space-time abilities? Theories won't be lacking, right, folks? The problem is that monsters kept coming out from everywhere, and just as Seo Muniap sealed the monsters in that dungeon, Seo sealed himself along with them. In short, it was for our protagonist to meet his end, but Seo Muniap, who is a mix of Grid and Sung Jin Woo, won't surrender easily. I believe Seo will be taken down, bringing as many as he can with him. And he would have, if he hadn't woken up all startled in a hospital gown. He coughed a bit, probably choked on his own saliva, and then the worried nurse arrives. Our protagonist, still confused, asks where he is. You're still in a dungeon, aren't you? The nurse is the final boss of the game here. Look at that, I've become the king of irony now. But of course, the nurse just says that they're in the hospital, which makes Seo freeze. Well, at least our protagonist is in the VIP ward of the hospital. Of course, after saving all humanity, I think it's the least they could do. And the protagonist froze like that because it was in 2005 that he entered the final dungeon. But the very calm nurse tries to help him by saying that she will explain everything. To start, she turns on the TV. And we have to admit that the artist of this work is amazing. The guy is drawing really well. We have to know how to praise too, you know, folks. It's not just about throwing stones, you have to throw bricks too. The nurse asks if he wants to see Jae Suk on TV, because the guy is saying that Seo Muniap, the leader of the 7 heroes considered deceased, returned alive after 17 years. The best is their faces. Seo Muniap is, I know you from somewhere, and the girl seems more lost than he is. I think she's never seen a television in her life. The news also says that Seo has the same appearance as when he entered the raid in 2005, including the armor. And the journalist also says that some experts believe this has something to do with space-time distortion. There's one of the theories I was talking about earlier, that the guy appeared behind Seo in the dungeon, and could have this kind of power to alter time. And our protagonist is still a bit shaken and not understanding the situation until the nurse tells him to take a look outside. Then Seo sees that there's really a crowd waiting for him. Of course, most are reporters wanting to get a scoop from him, which makes Seo a little irritated. But he asks the nurse to bring him a mirror. And when our protagonist looks at himself, he's astonished to see that he's still exactly the same as when he entered the dungeon in 2005. So now Seo is 47 years old. Did a space-time distortion really happen? If so, is this the same world he was in? Then, what about all the fortune that the protagonist spent years accumulating? Of course, the nurse has the answer to that, right? This nurse is really helpful. I like her. To make sure not to lose her, he should create a guild and recruit her as the team's healer. The nurse says that Seo's fortune was donated to the Children's Protection Institute, which unsettles him a bit. But the house that Seo had then, where is it? It seems the house has turned into a museum. There are even some influencers inside making videos at this very moment. So the expensive car he had, what happened to that machine? Apparently it was auctioned off for charity as well. Yes, our hero of humanity is currently poor, folks, which starts to leave Seo somewhat demotivated. But the nurse says that he's the great hero. No one would leave him in such a bad situation. In fact, just a little while ago, Baek Jiho tried to call Seo, and it seems he'll be coming soon. Seo thanks the nurse, and she says that if he needs anything, just call. When he looks to the side, Seo Muniap begins to think that he can't believe all this that's happening. It's too much information, and it's all very surreal. When Jiho arrives, Seo will have to ask Baek Jiho a lot of questions, and now it's time to check his physical condition. Yes, our protagonist is totally overpowered, folks. He has a very broken ability called appraisal. With this ability, he can assess the talents and abilities of living creatures, and it was this power that made him a true monster. He could even see how people would turn out in the future, in other words, the potential they could reach. Thanks to this, Seo managed to evolve faster than anyone. Quickly, at that time, he was already in all the newspapers, and even though he was young, Seo became the leader of dungeon raids. Then one day, this guy came to him and asked to be his disciple. Of course, as you might know, that's Jiho, one of the future 7 heroes. Our protagonist, upon checking all of Jiho's abilities and how far he could go with teleportation as his main ability, began to think the boy was a prodigy and decided to accept him as a disciple. In short, folks, it was those eyes that took him to the top, and now he's using them to check his own abilities. And if we look closely, besides all his stats being overpowered, we see appraisal, throwing, and wait a minute, immortality. Is that right, my friends? Are we going to have a protagonist full of hacks here? When the protagonist himself realizes that his mental strength has surpassed the human limit of 100, and that's not normal at all, could it be that he's no longer human at that moment? And yes, only now did he see the immortality ability. He is completely immune to physical attacks. Man, that's so broken. Seo himself said he didn't have this ability before, and he says these superpowers are created in special situations, probably because he was near his end. All battered, right? In short, folks, I think Nathan is screwed. No one can have more abilities than our protagonist. Hang in there, my friend. So Seo was starting to theorize some things in his head until someone calls him, and it's his old disciple. The guy comes in with a tearful face, and of course, Jiho breaks down crying because his great master and friend is back. Moreover, Seo was teasing Jiho for being weaker now. How cool is that, right? Can you imagine if this situation were real? The two decide to go to the rooftop of the building to talk while enjoying a spectacular view. Of course, as I said before, the artist here is amazing, folks. As the conversation goes on, Seo Munyap teases Jiho for being old. Then Seo asks his disciple if he fulfilled the promise. Jiho asks, "What promise?" And of course, it's about the book about the great man. Before staying behind, that was all Seo asked for. And of course, Jiho fulfilled it. The book is called The Savior of the World, Seo Munyap. Jiho says that after that, they even made a movie about Seo, which reached the top of the global box office. In other words, Seo Munyap is recognized now, folks. Hold on. He's the Jean-Claude Van Damme of Korea, you know. Suddenly, the protagonist says that he doesn't understand this new world much and that, moreover, he is now poor. However, Jiho says that this is not a problem and that he can get money for Seo since they are friends. But wait a minute, Sung Jin-woo, is that you? What are you doing here, old man? Of course, the protagonist wants to know how his friend currently makes money because Jiho leading a company, being the idiot he is, probably isn't the case, right? But he has a company and left it to the specialists to manage. Okay, so now you're a businessman, Baek Jiho, right? Not really, he has another job. Alright, so what do you work with now? Coach, I am the national team's coach. Of course, the protagonist immediately wants to know more about that, and it was at this moment that Seo began to understand more about things. Baek Jiho shows videos to Seo on his cell phone, displaying some of the battles and explaining about Battlefield, the virtual reality game that simulates dungeons and where competitions between players take place. This was made to make use of the superhuman's powers since there was nothing else to do with them. The protagonist finds it interesting, even for a children's game, but Jiho says it's not quite like that, my friend, because currently among the best players, there are some who are even at the level of the 7 great heroes. Ah look, 02 here, man. And Seo Munyap finds it interesting. You know, because even though he's disinterested, he asks, "That's cool, but what rank is Korea now?" That was like a stab to Jiho by surprise. Seo Munyap asks his friend if he's gone deaf with age and repeats the question. What's South Korea's ranking in this little game? Because even though Korea has a small population, it's quite strong in this aspect. So what's our rank? And he asks this while throwing trash from a distance into the bin. Actually, Korea is currently in last place in the ranking. He even misses the trash bin. Seo Munyap freezes to think, looks closely at Jiho, and asks, "What do you mean, last?" And I'll tell you, folks, I'm already feeling that the protagonist is one of those who doesn't accept losing. He's going to want to reach that rank soon and climb to the top, and that's exactly it. Then our protagonist was inside the car with his friend, discussing why this game, Battlefield, was created. Was it created for us to spend money to buy skins? No, this game was created to control the superhumans, right? Because when the great evil disappears, the next to be the evil is the one who defeated the first. No matter how much the most powerful beings are good, humans never accept being beneath others and feel threatened. They have to be in control always. Otherwise, it's not the human race. Now with this game, the superhumans seem to be under government control, besides the fact that the average level of players is quite low currently. So at that moment, Seo's friend mentions his name with a smile, and the protagonist immediately says no. And it's obvious that Jiho wants to recruit his friend for the game. Imagine the impact Seo Munyap would have now at 30 years old, at the peak of his power. But Seo tells Jiho that his time has passed, and his superhuman life ended there in the dungeon. He even asks his friend if he seems like the kind of person who would fight for others. Well, protagonist, you stayed behind to sacrifice yourself for humanity, so I think I would say yes. And the protagonist concludes that if he accepted that, the press would be very hard on him, saying things like, "The savior Seo Munyap is now going to save Korea in Battlefield." Well, they're not wrong. People would say that. But that Korea is terrible in the game, no one can deny. So Baek Jiho asks Seo Munyap one last question. Does thinking about Battlefield not pique your interest? And Seo says no, because he hates feeling like a clown, you know. So Seo states that he would feel like a clown if he did that, and that's the end of the questions, right folks? Until suddenly, the protagonist says that the superhumans of South Korea haven't completely failed. We still have superhumans like that girl. And unexpectedly, Seo had pointed to a billboard advertisement, and our protagonist even finishes his thought by saying, Look at her gaze. She's incredibly attractive. Out of nowhere, Baek Jiho says that that's his daughter. Man, the guy is interested in his friend's daughter. Well, who can blame him, right folks? The protagonist is on the right track. Then Seo even asks his friend, wasn't Hyeon only 6 years old? But the guy, quite shaken, says that 17 years have passed. She's currently 23 years old. The girl, when she was little, was all snotty, and now she's become quite a woman, huh? Of course, the protagonist even tried to make some excuses at that moment to ease the situation, but Jiho tells Seo to stop with that conversation, which was already over. Oh, my friend, soon Seo Muniop might say, I'll only participate in Battlefield if you give me your daughter in exchange. I wouldn't be surprised with this bold protagonist here, who knows? And after so much driving, they finally arrived at their destination, the house of the protagonist's friend, right? They are greeted by this woman named Han Sungi, who is a whopping 52 years old. I'm sure some guys in the comments will say they'd still go for her easily, right? Well, she's also well preserved for 52. She greets Seo Muniop, saying it's been a long time, but for our protagonist, only a week has passed. So Han says how she's aged in just 1 week, but Seo tells her to stop with the nonsense, because it really feels like only a week has passed, kind of implying that she still looks young. And Han gets all happy about that. Look at that, Seo is actually good at talking to women. I thought he'd have at least some flaw, maybe be all shy or something. The guy is handsome, super strong, and also good at conversation. Something's not right here, folks. Some dirt is going to surface soon. Oh, by the way, this woman is the wife of Seo Muniop's friend, okay? And apparently, only now does Seo begin to understand that 17 years have actually passed, especially since they went to a peaceful world without wars. And since Seo didn't know what to do, he went to take a look around, and he ended up finding a bag of chips, a controller, and that sofa. You guys already know what's coming, right? Is the great Seo Muniop going to become lazy? He even discovered soap operas on TV and starts saying that this is why he came back alive. His friend was passing by and hears Seo saying that he's going to watch all the soap operas he missed since 2005 up to now. The guy is in shock, right? Jiho runs up to Seo to ask if he was serious about what he said, and the protagonist replies to his friend that yes, it seems we've unfortunately lost the protagonist to soap operas, folks. Seo immediately asks his friend if he hadn't said he'd leave him alone, and Jiho even says yes. But the problem is that there's a crowd of reporters outside waiting for Seo for some days now, and they've said they won't leave until they see the protagonist. Seo Muniop, your lazy life didn't last very long, and there really are many reporters out there. The protagonist, as always, gets irritated with this and says, alright then. Seo asks his friend to gather all the reporters in one place the next day because he's going to tell those guys to disappear from his life. This Seo Muniop doesn't mince words, huh? The guy doesn't hold back, and already somewhere inside the hotel, everything was prepared. Seo is about to give his press interview, and among the reporters, there were already rumors that Seo was annoying and would blow up if he didn't like something. But currently he seems so well behaved. Are the rumors true? Say the reporters. And Seo Muniop starts off by saying that he's back, as everyone can see. Obviously if he's there, he came back, right? And Seo Muniop's friend is even happy to see him speaking so well. But Seo suddenly says that he's not at all happy to be receiving so much attention like this. Ask what you want and get out. Don't look at me ever again. This protagonist is crazy. I like him. The reporters ask how he came back, but he doesn't know either, since he woke up directly in the hospital. Then they also ask various things, like if he remembers the last 17 years, if he's already gone to see the 7 heroes, if he's going to recover his fortune, and to all that, the answer was no. And then someone raises their hand in the back. A little bald guy goes ahead and asks if he heard about Director Beck's Battlefield, and of course he did. Then the person asks if he has any intention of becoming an active player in Battlefield. And of course, this already created a bit of panic in the audience, right folks? Seo Muniop could be your savior again. However, Seo replies that no, he has no interest in that. Then the bald guy asks another question. Do you have any reason for not wanting to? And Seo replies that the game is boring. And that's when the reporter kind of tried to provoke him, stating that if he doesn't participate, it's because he feels he's going to fail in the game. Sarcastically, Seo Muniop says that the only failed thing here is the crystal ball the bald guy has on his head, leaving him completely embarrassed and irritated. Go ahead, lightbulb head. So Seo repeats that he has no interest whatsoever and won't play the clown for everyone's amusement there. It seems that was the last question, folks. The protagonist again tells them not to look for him anymore and was about to leave when a guy says he has one last question. The man says that the day before, the player Gerald Walker spoke about Seo Muniop, saying that the 7 heroes are nothing and couldn't even touch him, and asks what Seo thought about that comment. Yeah, I think that really struck a chord with our protagonist, and he immediately asks who this Gerald Walker is. The guy informs him that Walker is the pride of American tank players, one of the stars of the United States. The protagonist asks, "Oh, so he's the strongest player?" And the guy says, "Not exactly. There's a top 3 for the best battlefield players, and among them are Daniel Mansky from Germany, Roy Meyer from Ireland. We just have to see if that's the famous Northern Ireland, right? And lastly, none other than Nathan Berner from France. We know that one well, right, folks?" The man says that Walker is an incredible player but didn't manage to get into that ranking. So Seo laughs and says that even after 17 years have passed, whoever he is couldn't even make it into the top 3, so he'd better keep quiet. The press is all scared, and Seo is there saying that the guy doesn't need to fight him in Battlefield. He can come see me in real life, and I'll take care of him myself. So Seo Muniop just flipped the bird on national television to the American player, in addition to insulting and humiliating Walker live. And of course, Seo Muniop appeared on all the TVs, including Walker's TV, right? And I think Walker is pretty pissed off. An enraged Gerald immediately speaks with one of his agents, telling them to prepare a plane to Korea urgently. I can see this is going to turn into a big fight, huh? The protagonist isn't someone to mess with either. The guy doesn't hold back, and that's what happened. And this really reminds me of Solo Leveling, remembering that guy who wanted to take on Sung. Do you remember that? I think those who read it will recall, right? Those who haven't read it might find it hard to remember. And from the protagonist's expression, he only didn't challenge the top-ranked player because Walker wasn't number 1. Otherwise, Seo would have challenged the guy anyway. This Seo Muniop is really something, huh? I like him. Next, Jiho appears shouting on the phone because he's being informed that the United States of America wants an official match with them in 2 weeks. And the best part is the guy there trying to resolve the mess on the phone, racking his brains to fix everything. And Seo is still mad at him because Jiho was talking too loudly on the phone and was disturbing his soap opera. I think we can already name this protagonist the new king of slackers, right? However, Seo at least asks his friend what's going on, and Jiho replies that the United States of America is coming to them to pick a fight in 2 weeks. Seo almost said, "Wow man, tough luck for you, huh? I wouldn't want to be you right now. But of course, it's all your fault, Muniop, or have you forgotten about Walker?" "What? What are you talking about? That guy you said you'd bury in your backyard while flipping him off on international TV. Oh, that guy, right? I remember now." At that moment, Jiho says that Walker got very angry after being humiliated on international TV by the protagonist. Seo even mocks the situation. He got mad just because of that. And yes, the guy did. And it's because apparently Walker is quite sensitive when it comes to not being part of the top 3. In this case, he wanted to fight the protagonist right then. But since Seo doesn't play, it seems Walker is going to take it out on the Korean team. So the protagonist asks, "But what do they have to do with me? He's going to take it out on people who have nothing to do with it." Then Jiho was about to get furious with Seo, when suddenly the protagonist makes a connection. "Wait a minute, but you're going to have a match between national teams. Doesn't that mean that Haeyeon will also be there? Now you're interested in the matter, my friend. Look at the simp mode kicking in, defending humanity from chaos, saving the brunette from the trouble he himself created. What's important is the protagonist's own interests. The rest is just details, right guys? And some time later, speak of the devil, guess who came shouting through the door? Seo, who was watching a soap opera, was startled, wondering who had arrived, and of course, he is surprised. "Oh, you arrived earlier than expected, dear. And yes, folks, Haeyeon is here now. She says she came running after finding out that her uncle was at home, right? She even came with all her luggage. I think she's going to stay here forever now." She immediately asks her mother where her uncle is, so her mother replies that Seo is on the sofa watching TV in the living room. "Welcome, make yourself at home, no need to be shy, this shameless fellow." Unexpectedly, Haeyeon becomes very happy upon seeing Seo and runs toward him, jumping and all that. Seo Muniop starts to complain that she's too big to be jumping on him like that, but she's just happy that he's back. Man. Now the dirty minds will start to comment that she should be jumping on him anyway, right? Then the protagonist tells Haeyeon that he was worried she wouldn't remember him anymore. But how could Haeyeon forget? He always played with her and brought her treats to eat. But now look at her, already 23 years old. Just last week for Seo, she was still a little girl. And Seo quickly asks if she returned because of the upcoming official match. But Haeyeon replies that she came back just to see him. Look at that, the man is important, guys. However, she has a question, of course, and it's whether Seo really isn't interested in playing Battlefield. He immediately realizes that this is something from Jiho, but Seo responds that it's true. Our protagonist says he has zero interest in that game. This leads Haeyeon to ask why, and it's because Uncle has a lot to do, my dear. Seo says this pointing to the soap opera in the background. Has our protagonist become a true soap opera fan? I think we're going to lose the protagonist to soap operas, folks. Then Heian asks if he still isn't interested even if she asks nicely. Heian says this while placing his arm close to her, making it hard to resist, you see. I think I'd start liking Battlefield from now on. Just a coincidence, right? But our protagonist here, being legendary, Seo tells Heian to knock it off, which makes her say, "Wow, you've changed, haven't you, dear?" Then the famous Seo Muniup says that actually, he thinks they are the ones who have changed, right? Yeah, it actually makes sense since, to him, he was only gone for a week. Then Heian starts the emotional blackmail, saying that he used to do whatever she wanted. Well, but that was when at most you wanted a snack, right, my dear? And suddenly she changes her expression, saying that she has to do her avatar evaluation at the association, and asks if Seo will go with her. But he doesn't even know what the heck this avatar evaluation is. The poor guy just wanted to watch the end of his soap opera in peace. Then Heian says that her father will be too busy to go. Next, the girl makes the cutest face, asking if Seo can at least do this for her. Yes, guys, she is really beautiful. I think this whole uncle thing she calls him is because he was very close to the family. In this case, very good friends with Jiho, right? They don't have any blood relation. He's just a family friend. So, is it acceptable for them to be together? Or not? What do you guys think? I believe only those who approve will comment. I know you. But if Seo were to get involved, being a legendary hero, would it result in the famous legendary hero's romance? Guys? I think he would just ask at the time, should I activate immortality or leave it off? I get the reference. And of course, it's that cute face that the protagonist can't resist. So Seo says he'll accompany her, but he wants to know where. So Heian replies that he'll only find out if he really goes with her. Yeah, I admit I prefer characters with long hair, but with that cute face, you can take me anywhere, girl. Let's go. I'm already in the car. And this here is the Battlefield Association building. Of course, they're already heading to where the test will be conducted inside the building. Heian appears dressed in her gear, and now she just needs to enter the game using Never Girl. First, the system evaluates the weapons and armor. After that's done, folks, it's just like putting the popsicle in the freezer, and the ice cream is ready, right? At this moment, Heian is inside the game, while Seo is just casually observing. Of course, he is impressed to see this, and she starts to request a monster from inside to show her uncle in quotes, because he's really just a family friend. The summoned monster this time appears to be a crazy-looking wolf, and the creature seems furious. Seo can't believe that all of this is possible, and the guy explains to him how it's done, and that it's just a sport, in this case, a virtual reality game. But here, the protagonist begins to understand that the thing is quite serious. Until then, it was just a kid's game to him. And now, at this moment, he is interested in seeing how good Heian is. My friend, I'll tell you she's good, okay? We have to admit, at least that. Already inside, the little wolf goes at her with everything, and she prepares one of her weapons that looks like a whip. Heian jumps into the air and lassos the creature's neck, and with the monster's neck caught, she just needs to flip in the air, and that's it, the little wolf is down. Yeah, she's really good at what she does, huh guys? In this case, the system has already scanned the data it needed, and she can disconnect now. When she comes out, she runs toward her uncle, asking Seo what he thought of her performance. Then our protagonist responds that she wasn't bad at all for a 6-year-old girl but still has a lot to improve on, which makes Heian irritated. Next, Heian asks Seo why he doesn't try the game, so the girl's question starts to irritate the protagonist. Seo responds that he had already said he didn't want to compete. Then Heian, in an attempt to convince him, asks, "But who said it's to compete, you fool? I just asked you to try the game." Oops, I lost the argument there. Besides, she's very curious to see the true strength of the great hero her father has talked about her whole life. And of course, Heian adds some drama into the mix to make her life easier. "When I was old enough to see you fight, you had already gone, uncle. Now you're not even going to show me your potential after returning?" Seo is there like, you little rascal, are you really going to guilt trip me? Alright then, I'll test this game. But I'll do it just this once because you asked me, okay? And just that already makes the girl very happy. The guy who was there asks Seo if he really wants to try. Normally, they would need to see his attributes first, right? But since he won't compete, they can do the test immediately. Then the protagonist asks, "Right, so I just go in there now?" So the guy explains that if he goes in like that, he would only appear with random pants inside. He'd enter empty-handed in this case. So first, Seo needs to get his weapons. Wow, the guys are struggling to bring the weapon. Of course, they are not the original weapons of the legendary hero, but they're quite light for their size, says the protagonist. The guy says something like that, the weapons are light, and with the guys already out of breath from carrying those weapons back there. That's bold of Seo, and these standard disposable weapons here don't have any top attributes. In other words, they're just common, normal weapons. Then Seo throws the shield on the ground and says that this is fine for him. A spear is all he needs on this occasion. Now let's get on with this useless game because I'm already getting irritated. And here is the protagonist with his little helmet on his head, folks. So off he goes into battlefield. After the system scans the protagonist, he is finally in the game. Seo states that it's the same feeling as when you go through a portal of a dungeon in real life. And since everything is okay with the connection, after the dear niece wishes her uncle good luck, Seo stretches and immediately asks for a monster to fight, of course. So the guy fulfills Seo's request, but they didn't send the same monster that Heian had. A slightly more intimidating creature came for him, let's say, called Salarbun, and the guy explains that this is the well-known special monster that can only be harmed by aura. Moreover, they created this monster based on the information of the strongest species they had on record. In other words, the little creature must be incredibly strong. Then the little monster charges at our protagonist with everything it's got, but Seo doesn't seem to care much. He's not intimidated at all. Seo tosses the spear into the air, saying he doesn't know why he brought it, seeming like he only needs a finger to defeat the virtual beast. So, face to face with the monster, our protagonist unexpectedly just pokes it with a finger and literally disintegrates the creature, leaving everyone incredulous at witnessing that scene. Heian says that was too crazy and asks if Seo really finished off Salarbun with a single finger. Then Seo Muniap says she's getting impressed over nothing. The guy nearby tries to justify it by saying that the creature isn't that hard to defeat, but certainly not something you can kill with just a finger. An irritated Seo starts to lose patience, and tells his friend to stop sending him trash monsters. The legendary hero says he wants something new and strong since he has something to test. Now the protagonist understands that this game is almost no different from real life. Thus, Seo realizes he can test things in places like this. Even if the monster was of the strongest species, Seo was sure he wouldn't be impressed with the game's creatures because he didn't even break a sweat after that initial test. Suddenly, a voice says, "Yes, with your title as the strongest superhuman, it's impossible for you to be satisfied with just the Salarbun." Seo immediately realizes that was spoken in English. Then the whole system starts turning red. The guy gets all desperate trying to contain it because all those danger messages and that rift opening means someone is trying to connect to the protagonist's room using an external module. Then you can see the lower part of someone's face emerging from the rift, which already makes you imagine who the intruder is. He jumps through the rift with a shield and unleashes an attack in the air just to demonstrate his power, landing on the ground with fire in his eyes. This is Gerald Walker, the one whom our audacious protagonist challenged to a fight, flipping him off and saying he'd bury him in his backyard. The guy actually came and arrived asking if the protagonist's invitation still stands. Things are getting intense. Walker says he came because Seo summoned him and mocks Seo, saying he's at a loss for words. He then says our protagonist is scared because he thought he wouldn't show up. Unexpectedly, Seo remains silent. Sarcastically, Walker says he doesn't know if there are 7 or 8 heroes, but the only certainty he has is that he will prove right now that this reputation is just hot air. Then Walker launches an all-out attack on the protagonist who, as always, doesn't even move. Right in front of the blow, Walker slashed the air with all his might, but the legendary hero was no longer there. Gerald Walker freezes, and then he hears the sarcastic Seo Muniap say, "Afraid of you? Keep dreaming, buddy. I was just thinking about where in my backyard I'm going to bury you." But our protagonist, instead of attacking, just stood there provoking his opponent. Seo stops and observes Walker. Of course, the guy isn't foolish enough to attack recklessly again, so Walker also observes the protagonist. But how is all this possible? How did they manage to invade their system? Then the door opens with someone saying for them not to worry. This older man arrives saying that he was the one who allowed this, and you can see that Jiho, Heian's father and the protagonist's friend, is with him. The guy there is surprised because the president of the association is present. The older man says that everything that's happening was an agreement they made beforehand. Of course, they couldn't have known that, and he even apologizes for the confusion. Then the older man looks at the woman next to him and asks if that's sufficient. This man is Park Ji-tae, the president of the Korean Battlefield Association, and the woman is Emma Morse, Gerald Walker's trainer. It seems we can understand everything now. Jiho states that Seo owes him a lot, so if our protagonist has any common sense, he won't say anything about this. What's going on here is that they set all this up just so the protagonist would gain some interest in playing Battlefield for Korea. In reality, they trick Seo. But we also need a bit of excitement in this place. So back in the arena, the combat between Seo and Walker is heating up to the point that, with the clash of their blows, both the protagonist and Gerald are thrown backward. This is no joke, my friend. Seo admits that this guy is better than he thought, so he decides to use the ability that has always helped him the most, the Eyes of Analysis. Gerald is there, frozen in his stance, not understanding much, until we are shown his stats. Target * Gerald Walker, a human. The guy's strength is literally at the maximum, 100 out of 100. His dexterity isn't bad either, 91 out of 96. Will he never reach 100? Is that a natural limitation? It would make sense, but I don't know. Maybe with the protagonist's little finger, he could reach it, right? His speed is kind of embarrassing, 58 out of 62, but it's understandable for a tank. The guy can't be fast too. And as I said, he's a tank, so his endurance is 100 out of 100. Really impressive. His determination is 87 out of 97, his skill is 80 out of 93, and his aura is also at the limit, which is 88 out of 88, with his superpowers being body strengthening and indomitable. We have to admit that with 100 strength and 100 endurance, the guy is really tough. I thought he'd be weak, but he surprised me. Even the protagonist says he thought he was all talk but agrees that Walker is strong. Next, Gerald asks why CO suddenly stopped and is staring at him. Are you sizing me up, buddy? And yes, folks, the protagonist finally gets excited, saying that if someone like him had existed 17 years ago, they could have taken him to the final dungeon. Don't jump to conclusions, guys. I didn't mean to imply anything. Calm down, everyone. CO says that Walker has powers suitable for a tank, and then he has an idea. That thing he saw in the hospital when he opened his eyes for the first time, that insane superpower, he can test it against this guy. Do you know what he's talking about? Then the protagonist disappears into thin air and quickly appears right in front of Gerald Walker, which makes the guy freeze a bit. But then Walker raises his arm to attack, and you can see that the axe is going directly toward the protagonist. Gerald is startled because the protagonist literally stopped right in front of him, with a mocking smile even. And as we can see, the axe is going straight towards CO, which leads our protagonist to say that he'll show something interesting to Gerald. Then the legendary hero takes the full hit and is defeated. The people who are watching are left not understanding anything, until Heian asks why CO stood still and let himself be hit on purpose and got defeated. Gerald confirms this, saying that CO Muniop stopped advancing out of nowhere and didn't move anymore. Walker states that the protagonist let himself be hit. It even seemed like he wanted to be defeated, you know? Then, when Walker was about to think of something else, we hear, "Wow, that hurt more than I thought." And when Gerald realizes it, something is coming at him at 200 miles per hour. Quickly, Walker manages to dodge but is terrified, not understanding what happened. That was literally the protagonist's spear coming at him. So Gerald wonders how that was possible. Walker is incredulous and states that CO should have died after his attack since he didn't even defend himself. Then he hears someone coughing. Of course, you must already know who it is. As always, everyone present is left not understanding anything. Then, after the smoke clears, unexpectedly appears the legendary hero asking, "What did you think, Gerald?" CO then mocks his opponent, reminding him that he had said he would show him something interesting, and that was the protagonist testing his immortality. After our legendary, laid-back soap opera lover asks Gerald what he thought of him coming back to life, Walker is confused and wonders how this guy is alive. He must be hacking for sure. Then the protagonist actually tells Gerald that after returning from the final dungeon, he gained a power that literally makes him truly immortal. Then the sarcastic CO asks Gerald Walker if he wants to get beaten with or without immortality. Walker says he's not complaining but asks CO if he doesn't think that's a skill that's a bit overpowered. CO agrees with his opponent and asks the guy with glasses to disable his immortality ability because it will be a boring fight if he uses it. As always, this protagonist is humble. He turns off his immortal mode just so he doesn't embarrass his friend. And of course, the guy turns off the superpower that CO asked for. So Gerald wonders how the famous legendary hero has the power to become immortal. Now that it's turned off, Gerald can't complain if he loses. With that, Gerald grabs our protagonist's spear that was on the wall, and as Walker throws the weapon to CO, he says that the legendary hero is really as arrogant as they say. Then Walker states that at that moment, he just needs to check if CO's abilities are as good as the rumors suggest. And we have to admit, if there's someone humble here, it's Gerald. The guy came from another country to trade blows with our protagonist wearing just shorts and flip-flops. He lives in the United States and isn't wearing some fancy Nike shoes. More humble than Gerald is impossible. Now, on the other hand, if you want to see someone less humble, it's our protagonist grabbing the spear and saying that he's actually much stronger than the rumors say. After CO's statements, Walker says he will see if he's all that with his own eyes and then tells CO to get up and start the fight. So CO mocks his opponent, and immediately asks why he doesn't go defeat a top 3 or something like that. He can't just skip the entire line and face the boss right away. Then CO mocks Walker again, saying that he heard his opponent wasn't even in the top 3, calling him Baldy. We have to agree on one thing, our protagonist really knows how to irritate Gerald Walker, to the point that Gerald becomes so furious he charges at CO like a madman, fuming with rage against him. They then exchanged blows with full force, the bald guy completely focused while CO was still laughing at him, until unexpectedly, Gerald's last strike hits nothing but air. Walker is astonished after his opponent disappears right before his eyes. Sarcastically, Seo appears right behind him and says that if Gerald slips up, he'll get beaten without Seo even using immortality. Desperate, Gerald tries to turn every fiber of his body as quickly as possible, while Seo Muniap is already approaching with a spear from behind, aiming right at Gerald's nose. Then, unexpectedly, Walker, with his sharp reflexes, jumps backward, saving himself from the legendary fighter. However, even though our protagonist appreciates Gerald's reaction time, Seo states that unfortunately, it's not enough. Seo then says that the time has finally come to end this duel. With his spear gripped in his right hand, our protagonist prepares, looks intently at his target, and throws the spear with all the speed in the world toward the bald guy. Gerald manages to defend against the spear, and unexpectedly, as a stroke of luck, the weapon slips off the shield and passes right by him. Our protagonist wasn't playing around. Seo attacked with just a random spear, with no special attributes, against a guy who has 100 resistance, and still caused damage. Our legendary hero literally brought Gerald to his knees. After making his opponent kneel, our protagonist had essentially won this fight. And as I said, with a bit of luck, the spear grazed Gerald's shield, but in fact, it was never luck. Surprisingly, our protagonist aimed at the side where he was blocking with the shield to catch him off guard. The spear literally changed trajectory in the air, which led Gerald to realize how terrifying Seo Muniap's control over the spear is. Then Walker says he wasn't defeated and only suffered a scratch. Once again, our protagonist mocks his opponent, stating that he wasn't finished off only because that wasn't his intention. Seo then asks why Walker is complaining after he went easy on him, questioning if he's foolish or something. Out of nowhere, Seo starts scolding Gerald, saying that he shouldn't use such a large shield. Seo states that because the shield is so big, it ends up hindering him in battle, leaving Gerald confused. Seo says he's just giving him advice because he has potential. Our protagonist explains that Walker's field of vision is literally being obstructed by the shield. Seo tells Gerald that people probably said he could only see what's in front of him when he was little, and for that reason, he decided to use a large shield. Apparently, it seems that Seo's remarks hit Gerald right on target. Then Seo says that a large shield is good for that, but it's an incomplete solution to the situation. It will be bad against strong people like me, who can use your field of vision against you, my dear. In other words, considering your agility and control, a smaller shield will be better for you in the long run. After Seo's statements, Walker is left speechless. Unexpectedly, our protagonist gave a lesson on how to be a tank without being a tank. Then Gerald asks if Seo isn't lying. The legendary hero asks why he would lie about that. Seo tells Gerald that even if he tells and teaches him everything, it still won't be enough to defeat him. Our protagonist is humble as always. Gerald thinks about it, and says that trying won't do him any harm, so he'll try to defeat him. What's funny is who's watching this from the outside. Jiho even asks Seo why he went to teach that crazy Walker when he was already a problematic guy. Seo replies that it's because he doesn't fear danger. He himself has already said that even if he teaches Gerald, the bald guy will never surpass him. Then Seo says that if the bald guy just puts his teachings into practice, he'll improve. Seo states that at that moment, he only needs to watch his soap operas. In fact, Gerald, since I taught you so well, make sure to deposit the fee for the lessons when you get home, don't forget. Unexpectedly, Seo gets into a fight and still manages to make a sales pitch during it. Our protagonist is literally selling a course in the middle of the battle. What's going on? And the worst part is that Gerald accepts, saying he will pay him for the teachings. After settling and giving money to the protagonist, he says he has a condition for that. So Seo asks what kind of condition. That's when Gerald says he wants to fight Seo again. Walker says that in 2 weeks there will be an official match, and he wants the protagonist present. Seo then says he's not interested in Battlefield because he has plenty of soap operas to watch. He even gets irritated and tells Walker to keep his own money because he doesn't care anymore. However, Gerald insists, saying he will pay in cash and that Seo just has to compete, but the protagonist says again that he doesn't want to. Then Gerald says it will be different next time and that Seo has to compete. Seo remarks that he saw in the bald guy's eyes that he was going crazy. Unexpectedly, they start shouting at each other, Gerald saying that Seo has to compete, and the legendary hero saying he doesn't want to, with people outside just watching everything. Until Park Jin-tae has an idea. He gives an evil laugh, saying he can use this against the protagonist. The next day at Jiho's house, guess who's watching soap operas as always? The legendary laid-back soap opera addict, of course. Suddenly, Seo hears that the broadcast was interrupted for an emergency announcement, which even makes him stand up. Right at the moment when there was going to be a kiss in the soap opera, they interrupt, and the broadcast says that Mr. Seo Muniap has publicly and firmly declared that he would not play Battlefield. However, they received a report saying that in a recent duel against Gerald, there was a possible change in this. The protagonist watches those absurdities being said on TV, until the presenter says that an audio leaked where it was said that if the United States teams could win 11-0 without anyone being eliminated in the next duel between the United States and Korea, the legendary hero will participate in battlefield against the United States. He even says that the anonymous source also informed that Seo Munyap himself accepted these terms. I knew that the old man would set up the protagonist. Seo, upon hearing this, nearly had a stroke, my dear. But will he literally play in battlefield? Actually, I'm starting to get excited to see our legendary protagonist crushing the competitors, especially Nathan from France. Imagine Nathan's fight against the legendary hero. Then Seo personally goes to the building where that information was being broadcast, and upon arriving there, asks who was the jerk who anonymously said those things on TV. At that moment, Park Ji-tae appears, believing he would be discovered, while Seo asks what video that was broadcast and notes that they cut all the moments when he simply said no. Seo emphasizes that it was clearly manipulation by the broadcaster, and that they had to take it off the air. The protagonist was about to decapitate the old bald man for creating this mess, when suddenly Park Ji-tae turned around, apologizing for allowing something like this, which harms the honor of the legendary hero who saved the world, to happen. That literally caught the protagonist off guard. He, a true soap opera addict in the midst of a cliché, was left speechless. With the most forlorn puppy dog eyes imaginable, the old man began to apologize more and more, saying that unfortunately he was forced into it since the American Association was involved. This almost reversed the roles in the situation. The protagonist, who was irritated, began to hesitate to place blame on the old man. But since he is the most laid-back person in the world, he was simultaneously starting to regret his own regret. Seizing the opportunity, Park Ji-tae quickly proposed a great plan so that Seo Munyap wouldn't be harmed by all this. If the United States team could win 11-0, winning all 11 matches in the tournament without any losses in the next clash between their nations, only then would the legendary hero participate. These were the conditions that Park Ji-tae established. He said this with his face beaming. We have to admit that this old man is a cunning fox. At that moment, he was full of hope, but our legendary and insolent hero simply said he wouldn't participate, and had no interest in anything involving that cursed game. Park Ji-tae, as if he hadn't heard a word the protagonist said, remarked that it's almost impossible for these 11-0 conditions to actually occur. Then he used the classic guilt trip. How long have we known each other? Save my skin just this once, brother. Park Ji-tae even said that in return he would donate all the profits to the protagonist's favorite children's organization, believing the proposal was irresistible. After much effort, the protagonist finally agreed to the terms. The old man told him to relax, assuring that even with Seo's acceptance, there's no chance of it happening. Following that, we had the typical scene of the old man trying to hug our protagonist, perhaps to test him, and the protagonist playing hard to get, saying that if even one Korean lost, he wouldn't participate, and it wouldn't help to come crying to him afterward. Park Ji-tae was overjoyed and said it was all fine, promising to keep his word regardless of the results. Ending the meeting, the old man invited them to dinner. The protagonist immediately asked if Park Ji-tae was going to pay. If the food was free, they were already at the door. The old man replied affirmatively. Park Ji-tae was all smiles, talking about a nearby restaurant that was very good. However, he said this while looking back, apparently pondering something. He was thinking about the records inside the drawer, which showed the results of the last 5 matches, clearly indicating that in the last 5 games, Korea had lost without scoring a single point. In other words, they had never even defeated a single American player up to that point. All of this was a little play by the old man to trick the protagonist. Effectively, the protagonist was already committed to battlefield at that moment. The old man is truly a genius. The next day, at the house where the protagonist was staying, they interrupted the soap opera again to broadcast updates about the match. We bring news about Seo Munyap, who accepted the United States proposal. He changed the channel, and yes, it was confirmed, he might actually end up playing battlefield. Already irritated, Seo changed the channel again. Breaking news! Seo Munyap will participate in the match. Seo Munyap appeared furious, saying, My God, I'm going to go crazy. Why do these channels talk about me all day instead of airing a soap opera? At that moment, our protagonist was just thinking about cutting ties with that darn old man, especially with his favorite soap opera being interrupted constantly to make announcements about the legendary hero joining the game. With apparently nothing else to do, the protagonist decided to get some fresh air. While Seo was admiring the street scenery, he heard strange sounds coming from the side. When he went to check, there was his niece training. But I must say, if this were a driving school, you would have failed, my dear, knocking over all the cones like that. Regardless of your control, Your speed was really impressive, not to mention your appearance, of course. The protagonist, seeing that, was immediately impressed. Then Seo thought, today's the day things will go my way. Observing further, you could see that Jiho, Heian's father, tossed the ball into the air. So the girl immediately notices it, and, in a matter of seconds, lassos the ball with her whip, which apparently doesn't have any significant power. Seo, upon seeing the whole situation, didn't seem to care much until he heard Jiho explaining that she needs to go faster since she's in the position of a secondary damage dealer, which makes Heian very happy. Our protagonist, who was just observing Jiho overwhelming her with information, decides to use an ability, the evaluation skill. Our lovely Baek Heian has the following stats. Strength 61 out of 82. I must admit I found this quite low. You'll need to train more, my dear. On the other hand, her agility is already at the top and can't advance further, so for now, she's training that aspect in vain. Her speed is 94 out of 95, which I found very high. However, her endurance isn't the best, 59 out of 80. Her mental strength is quite good, being at the maximum of 81 out of 81, but her skill level is rather average, 63 out of 75. I consider her aura to be average as well, 66 out of 70. Her powers are teleportation and the rope, the famous whip. Despite everything, Heian's agility is impressive. Of course, it's not as good as Jiho's at his peak, so it's impossible for her to reach the performance he wants. However, the limits of her strength attributes are much better than her father's. After viewing Heian's stats, the protagonist concludes that it's absurd to keep this woman in the same position her father was, in this case, a secondary damage dealer. While she asks for a break, we see Seo approaching from behind. At that moment, Heian is surprised to see him out of the house. She's impressed that Seo isn't watching soap operas, which wasn't normal. But the protagonist quickly understands that even though she is the best on the team, she is far below expectations and there's no way they can beat any of the Americans. Heian is happy to see him and asks Seo if he saw her training, and he says yes. Then the legendary figure asks if she doesn't think she should train something beyond agility, which immediately causes Jiho to intervene, saying that they actually need to train a bit more. The protagonist, lacking patience, states that Heian is not her father, and Jiho doesn't understand anything. Then Seo points his finger at his friend, telling him to stop with that unnecessary training since Jiho is only doing it because he misses his glory days. Our protagonist concludes by saying that her agility has reached its limit, and the same goes for her whip. Heian was just observing everything until the protagonist calls her and asks, "What do you do when you grab your opponents with the whip?" The girl responds that she does various things, tries to unbalance them, throws her opponents toward her allies, and sometimes does nothing, ties them up and just watches. Seo then says that's the problem. He asserts that she must finish them off with her own hands. What Seo meant was that, in the past, Heian's father had a strong person in their group to finish off opponents, which was himself, unlike her situation. So what matters for her now is strength and swordsmanship. She needs to finish them off with her sword. As a demonstration, Seo takes Heian's weapons, saying he'll only show it once, so she should pay close attention. Seo Munyap faces his opponent, better known as, I don't know what the heck that is, a training dummy. Seo pulls the whip and firmly grabs the target. Then, simultaneously, with his dagger, he cuts the target in fractions of a second. We have to admit that the guy is impressive. A man with this level of skill could be the best coach in the world. Even with just a broomstick, he could teach others to sweep better. Heian and her father are left speechless. Seo then says that Heian should be as skilled with the sword as she is with the whip, so she needs to train strength and swordsmanship. In other words, our protagonist states that from that moment on, Heian will change from a secondary DPS to a melee DPS. Seo then asks if the girl's father understands. Confident, the legendary figure says that they will start with 500 sets of light strength training. Upon hearing Seo's statements, Heian and Jiho are in shock. The girl wonders what kind of monster says that 500 sets are light. Suddenly, the protagonist starts to get furious, asking why they are standing still. Seo reinforces the order. 500 sets of strength training now. To conclude, the protagonist declares that from that moment on, he is Heian's trainer. I believe he's helping like this mainly because he doesn't want to participate in the game. If Heian manages to defeat someone in the game, he wouldn't need to participate. Meanwhile, at the American team's training facilities in Korea, we see this man, the manager agent of Walker, praising him, saying that he has made great progress in recent days. The great Gerald, nicknamed Lamphead, is completely surprised by this information and even asks if his performance has really improved that much since the man is praising him, and the agent confirms it. When Seo Munyap told him that he needed to switch shields at that moment, the man was skeptical, but after a few days of analysis, it seems that some of Gerald's weaknesses have been improved. The agent literally states that after he refines the style, he can reach the much-desired top 3 in the world ranking that he always wanted. He tells Walker that it will take a while for him to get fully accustomed, but they will certainly have many long-term advantages. You know those people who are like blockheads, who listen and listen but don't absorb anything? Well, that's Gerald. Lamphead. In the end, Walker simply stops and asks the agent, if we were to convert the value of this change into money, how much would we be talking about? And the agent, all happy, says it would be $10 million. The man also says that if Walker perfects this style, the next time he renews the contract, he will earn a much higher salary. So Gerald thinks to himself, $10 million. Walker glances to the side and sees Seo on the TV. Then Gerald tells his agent to send the $10 million to Seo Muniop right now. The agent is shocked because it's an absurd amount, but Gerald says that was the consulting fee for the great legendary hero. Didn't see that coming. At this moment, we can clearly see that Walker is not in the game just for the money. He really wants to become stronger. He must value the battle. I admit I'm starting to like Gerald. Then Gerald extends his arm as if pointing to the legendary hero and says he will definitely make him come to the arena. Surprisingly, Gerald, Lamphead, managed to impress me. He really is a distinguished warrior, we have to admit. Next, at the competition stadium, we see the presenter narrating. Today we are here at the International Battlefield Stadium in Seoul, South Korea, where we will finally have a clash between South Korea and the United States of America. I think the spectators will be delighted with the outcome of today's game, since the big friendly match between Gerald Lamphead and the legendary hero of humanity depends on today's game results. So I will introduce the players of the two teams. On the South Korean side, we have several skilled competitors, and in the United States team, we also have a very skilled team. The stars of today's match are Baek Haeyeon from Korea, a melee DPS, and Gerald, better known as Gerald Lamphead among internet users. Meanwhile, our protagonist is quite relaxed just watching, and of course, he's rooting for his dear niece to do her best. Today's match will be in the dungeon known as the Ancient Castle in the underworld protected by skeletons, the Castle of Martha Bruni. This dungeon has 3 floors, each containing a boss. On the first floor, we will have the Skeleton Warrior boss. On the second floor, we will have the Great Death Knight. I believe this one must be very strong. And last but not least, on the third and final floor, the Bone Dragon Lich will be waiting for them. This last one must be insane. So here are the rules of Battlefield. The conditions for victory are to defeat all opposing players, also acquiring hunting points by defeating monsters or players. And with these points, the bonus aura you will gain is defined, with blue being the weakest and increasing up to the strongest aura. Then the players begin to enter the field in single file. Speaking of single file, I always thought it had to do with the people who live in India, but recently I researched and saw that it has to do with combat strategies of some indigenous people, hence the name. Did anyone know that? Or am I the only clueless one here? Obviously, the Americans were entering in single file with Lamphead leading them, until the match finally started. The group of Americans had just left the initial zone, as can be seen precisely on the minimap, and Gerald's team seems focused on winning the competition, until they come face to face with the first wave of monsters. The skeletons, which are usually the weakest monsters in games, seem to be no different for Gerald. He and his team pass through the skeletons as if they were nothing. The narrator himself mentions that they are slow because they're still at the beginning of the dungeons, but speed isn't what they're known for. Gerald's group is known as an iron wall due to their absurd defense. In short, the group will take time to arrive, but when they do, I want to see them face this team. On the Korean team, Haeyeon is in full swing doing what she practiced, and unlike the American team, they are very fast. Something impresses the presenter. It seems the Korean team is ignoring the skeletons and just running past them. Even at the second wave of monsters, they ignore everything and move forward. Haeyeon's father, seeing this, says they're doing the right thing, implying that this strategy came from him. So if things go wrong, we know who to blame. The audience is shocked because they've never seen the Korean team adopt such an aggressive stance, going straight to the first boss. Of course, this is very risky, but if it works, it will be a guaranteed victory. The Koreans are advancing with everything inside the dungeon, quickly heading toward the first floor boss, until they finally come face to face with the skeleton warrior. On one side, Haeyeon is focused. On the other, her father is apprehensive since the idea was his. Unexpectedly, we see Gerald talking to someone through some kind of communication device. We discover that the man doing this is Paul, Gerald's informant, and he's reporting that something unexpected happened in the boss's room. Gerald, upon hearing that the Korean team was already facing the first boss, even lost the shine of his bald head. After a brief exchange, they decide to head to where the boss is as well. Gerald mentions that his feet aren't so fast, so he'll need his teammates' powers. Back in the boss's room, the creature is furious. The Korean team is saying that the boss is almost defeated and that Haeyeon will finish him off, which explains why he's so enraged. The girl leaps toward the boss to deliver the final blow until a light appears from her right side, causing her to quickly look in that direction. The light is none other than Gerald. Lamphead, living up to his nickname, Walker arrives, reflecting the ambient light with his bald head. After being hit, Heian felt she would be defeated, and her team, upon witnessing that scene, began to lose heart after seeing Walker easily injure their best member. Jiho realizes that his strategy didn't work, and we have to admit that the tactic wasn't that bad. They just had the bad luck that Gerald had an informant. At this moment, we find out that Walker reached the Korean team by flying, thanks to the storm power of one of his team members. After Heian was struck by just one of Gerald's blows, she was easily defeated. This only shows how powerful Walker is, the future top 3 of Battlefield. Gerald says that the Korean strategy wasn't bad, but even if they had managed to finish off the boss, the result of this match wouldn't be different. Then we see Gerald's aura starting to change from blue to purple after finishing off Heian, just as described in the rules. With that, the members of the United States team attacked the boss from behind, and you already know the outcome. Now that the boss was defeated within 10 minutes, the first floor will close, prompting Gerald to say it's time to end the game. Next, Walker's team attacks and finishes off all the Koreans. Unexpectedly, even the informant seems strong and defeats some of them. Quickly, the American team overwhelmed the Korean team. The Koreans didn't even stand a chance. When everything seemed over, Gerald says that this ends the first round, with the fall of that last Korean to the ground. With the black aura, Walker delivers his coup de grace. With this, we reach the end of the first battle, 11-0 for the United States of America. The second battle will begin after a break for the players to recover, especially the Koreans who were crushed. We then see Heian heading toward the restroom, and it's clear she's sad about losing again. In fact, she seems to be in shock because even her uncle helped this time, but it didn't work. As the girl looks ahead, someone says that now that all the players seem to have arrived, they should listen to him carefully. Then, only at that moment did Heian realize that Seal was in the room. What a big doorknob this is! Where do I click to buy a doorknob like this? The protagonist then begins by saying that their eyes were almost bleeding from watching that disgusting game, and that in the next match they'd better do everything he orders. At that moment, a team member says that the coach is Baek Jiho. Irritated, Seo orders the boy to be quiet because he hadn't asked anything. Seo then tells the team that if they continue playing so recklessly, the one who will be harmed is him, and asks if they knew that. Unexpectedly, the same boy replies that they didn't know, and again Seo orders him to be quiet, saying that the boy is too incompetent to address him. Seo believes that the team was too eager to win and therefore was careless, consequently being easily defeated. Besides, your attributes are much inferior and the team's morale is on the ground, so of course you're going to lose. Seo continues, saying that with their current skill level, even if they play thousands or millions of times, the victory rate will always be 0. But isn't it shameful to lose like that without accomplishing anything? So listen to me carefully. I will make you at least manage to defeat Gerald Lamphead. Gerald is like a defense tower, unstoppable, impenetrable. Our protagonist then begins to explain the strategy, recounting that Martha Bruni's castle, where they are at that moment, was one of the dungeons he personally attacked along with the current president of the association when he was younger. Seo mentions that the attack itself wasn't that difficult, but the bone dragon on the 3rd floor was very hard to defeat. However, having observed all of them so far with their current abilities, Seo doubts they can even reach the dragon. In summary, Seo Munyak called them all weak and incompetent, and no one dared to contest. The hero says that the strategy they used in the first battle wasn't so bad. Of course, if it had been executed correctly and perfectly it would have been good, which was not the case. Seo decides to point out the mistakes they made. First, they were focused on finishing off the boss and forgot to do area reconnaissance, which was the main cause of the whole team being wiped out. Secondly, they didn't provide cover for the allies on the front line, literally watching Heian attack the boss alone, and Gerald attacking her while they just stood by. And I just found this guy here with that suspicious look strange, or am I imagining things? To sum it all up, that's why this horrible team lost 11-0 to the United States of America. At that moment, our protagonist starts to feel a bit sorry for Jiho, Heian's father. However, after everything had gone wrong, there was no use crying over spilled milk. So Seo says that from now on, everyone will follow his orders. At this moment you'll realize how important it is for someone to relay strategies in the game, especially when they don't keep trash-talking in the middle of the match, disrupting their own team. We then begin the second battle with the United States team splitting into 2 groups, one squad of 6 people and a second squad of 5. The first will be in charge of going ahead and preparing the terrain, so that the second squad, which includes Gerald Lamphead, can come from behind and clean everything up. Their idea here is to showcase all of Gerald's potential, that's why they're adopting this tactic. At this moment, the commentator asks what the Korean team will do to deal with this. The audience is already in shock. As soon as Baek Hae-yeon, who had disappeared somewhere, returned, they started running at full speed. Go, Korean team! The Korean team has always used defensive strategies, but why are they changing now? This includes the change in Baek Hae-yeon's position. It's turning out to be a match full of surprises, but this is not a surprise for our protagonist. He himself said that if they do exactly what he instructed, their opportunity will certainly appear. Even Baek Hae-yeon, who always takes a beating in all battles, is now confident that it will work. And here we are in the second battle in the boss's room. That guy went again to do area reconnaissance, but unlike the first time, the boss is alone at this moment. The informant only tells Walker that he'll continue waiting there for the Korean team to appear. At the moment, we have players positioned here on the map, with Gerald in the second squad, right at the rear. It's obvious that he's a bit suspicious since they've changed tactics again, but at the same time, he's also pleased because it's only a matter of time before he wins another battle and fights against the true hero. While Walker was thinking about how to fight the legendary hero, something behind him began to crack. He automatically turned around, startled, as the wall completely broke and people started coming out of that hole right above Gerald's bald head, literally members of the Korean team. Since they hadn't anticipated this, everyone on Gerald's team was desperate due to the surprise attack. The answer to how the Korean team came out of the wall is, of course, something you already know. It's obvious that the legendary hero did something. Seo's tactic that day was that the first thing they had to do was reconnaissance done by Hae-yeon, since she's the fastest. If, when she arrived, Walker's squad numbered 5 or fewer, they were to simply ignore the boss and go after that group with everything they had. But then we have another problem here. How will they all get past and attack the group at the rear? That is, Walker's group. Apparently, this wouldn't be possible. However, as far as everyone knows, Martha Bruni's castle has only one path to follow. But in reality, there is a secret passage that leads from one side of the map to the other, made by the undead at the time. This passage is perfect for enemy reconnaissance and surprise attacks. In other words, that was Seo's strategy. Our protagonist obviously taught them where they should break the wall to find this secret passage. By going through this location, they won't encounter any monsters inside, so all 11 Korean players can advance through the passage and simply surprise them, catch all the Americans from behind and in smaller numbers. However, even though there were only 5 Americans, they had Gerald. Then Hae-yeon appears right in front of Gerald and takes a good look at his bald head. Seo had advised her to aim for the man's legs. On that day, she even considered whether the monster known as the Raging Tank, that had almost never been defeated, would have such a weakness in his legs. And yes, Walker does, but it's temporary, thanks to the fact that he still hasn't gotten used to his new shield. Knowing Walker, the protagonist even questions whether his legs are still a weakness, since Gerald is in constant evolution. But there's a small detail that might be worrying Walker currently, the fact that he has to deal with the bet of not losing any member of the American group in order to duel against Seo in the future, besides the fact that he's with less than half of the players. In other words, Gerald is really in trouble and full of psychological pressure. So Hae-yeon will have to seize every opportunity, and it seems she will. The girl is totally confident that her uncle's plan will work this time. Then she disappears into thin air and reappears right above the bald man. Of course, she's also receiving help from a player with support abilities on her team. The Korean team member's ability is literally to consume his own aura to strengthen an ally's abilities. In other words, Hae-yeon is attacking Walker full of extra abilities. However, Gerald performs an attack that automatically eliminates 2 Koreans in a single blow. In fact, I believe Hae-yeon was supposed to have been eliminated as well, but she passed by him using a teleport, which leaves Gerald surprised. But who was Hae-yeon looking for among all the players to have avoided Gerald in that way? By this point in the game, she had already, like Walker, eliminated 2 American players. Only then did Walker realize that what she wanted was to take out their support player. However, at that moment, Gerald couldn't afford to go after her, so Walker turns around fully, charging with his shield, and of course, this generated another kill for Walker, totaling 3 opponents eliminated. But even though Gerald had informed Squad 1, they wouldn't appear anytime soon, and they were completely surrounded. At that moment, the fight was 3 against 8. The Koreans begin attacking with everything they'd got, always holding the numerical advantage, but Walker would never surrender easily. So Gerald throws his spinning axe at one of the Koreans and manages to defeat him without difficulty, bringing his total kills to 4 for the bald man. However, Walker didn't expect that his turn would come. He even feels someone approaching and quickly turns around, but finds no one in the direction he looked. Then, surprisingly, Hae-yeon zooms past the bald man at 200 km per hour, and all we can see is a slash. As she runs by, the girl literally takes Walker's leg with her. Swiftly, Hae-yeon spins and lassos Walker's remaining leg, pulling with all her might and causing the bald man to fall seated on the ground. Quickly, the rest of Walker's squad starts falling, and the Korean team advances with full force, their numerical advantage leaving only one person remaining. It seems our dear Hyeon, with determination in her eyes, is ready to settle the score. Defeated on the ground, Walker asks the girl, "What is this sudden change in style and in such a short time? By any chance, was it Seo Muniap who trained you?" The beautiful Hyeon, without saying a word, points her sword at him. Gerald simply manages to smile and imagine how wonderful this situation is, how remarkable this legendary hero is to defeat him without even entering the battle. At that moment, the commentator announces that the Korean team has truly defeated the 5 American players, including Walker, and emphasizes, "That was an insane comeback, my friends!" Even Jiho was impressed by this, because for years they could never finish off anyone or win anything. So Jiho, like the rest of the spectators, wondered how that was possible. Thus, the second set comes to an end. Commentators noted that the match held more significance for the Korean team. Even so, the American team emerged victorious. Had the Korean team not clashed with the American advanced squad, perhaps things could have been different, but it was a shame for the entire Korean team. They could not withstand the counterattack from the opposing team. The American team's star looked at the scoreboard, believing the Korean team had scored 5 fewer points. Possibly, the scene of them exiting the secret passage was one of the most remarkable moments of the game. At the center of all the chaos was a player, who had achieved 4 kills and 1 assist for the Korean team's star, the young Baek Hae-yeon. Coach Baek Jiho was at that moment giving a few interviews. Reporter Oh Jae-hai asked why the team members had been acting differently. The coach stated that, even though they had lost, the experience was great. She also wanted to know about the surprising entry through the secret passage in the second set. He explained that the dungeon was famous for having only one path. However, he couldn't reveal much, as the strategy for the second set wasn't entirely his. Adjustments had been made with the help of people around them, and he glanced in the direction of the one who provided the significant ideas for that round. Yet, soon his intentions were noticed. He knew someone was planning something to bring him into the game. The next interviewee was Baek Hae-yeon. She listened intently as the reporter praised her as the best player of the day's match. When asked about training, she mentioned that Sip had been training and changing her in-game position. Seated in front, he watched the interview to see if everything was going well. Regardless, he didn't understand why those two were discussing him again. He was surprised by his old friend's question if he hadn't really changed, and if he still had the habit of getting annoyed when embarrassed. He asked why his friend wasn't there for the interview, as he was the association's president. Finding it amusing, he said there was nothing interesting he could add in an interview. Even so, he wanted to know why his friend was beside him, and what he wanted to say. He mentioned that all of it reminded him of the old days, with that well-known secret passage, and he thought using the secret passage was a bit of a low blow. However, he explained that the enemy team had many resilient tanks, so he thought of a strategy. As for Hae-yeon, he wanted to know if she had trained and changed her designated position before. He found it interesting, as that was something achieved in just a day or 2 of training. His old friend thought that, even after so much time, it was good to see the strategy he had devised. Yeep said he knew it was indeed amazing. This made his friend question the talent, if he was planning to use it for something else. Still, he didn't like the direction of the conversation, as he had already won the bet. The old friend, like a fox, assured him that it would be the last offer and urged him to listen carefully. The Korean Professional Battlefield League season would begin soon. Yeep asked if he wanted him to be the professional league player. That wasn't the proposal. He said he would never ask for something like that. In fact, the proposal was to set up a charity match with famous players. The friend thought that if he refused, he would have no more options. He only said he would consider it. That was already a good start, and he couldn't believe he actually said he would think about it. He thought the guy had always shown disdain for all that and seemed to be changing. Yet, he kept talking. He said that after watching Hane's game, he became somewhat interested. Since dungeons no longer existed, then that game was the only place where he could fight. This made his friend very happy, who said that's the spirit. He mentioned that, anyway, within an hour of the video being posted online, the video of that match had exceeded 10 million views, and all those comments made him quite uncomfortable. His friend was overjoyed because he heard him say he would participate. Yeep said he would only consider it and hadn't accepted yet. Even so, he was beaming with joy, and just the fact that he was considering it was a great achievement. It would be an idea since the professional league season was so close to starting. He wasn't sure if it was good to have a charity match right before the season began. He also said that if he participated in the charity match, there would be a few conditions. His friend said he didn't know what those conditions were, but he would accept as long as he played with him. Yeep thought that things were very easy there, thus he found it excellent. At Beck's house, something was happening that drove him out of his mind. Furious, he asked what was going on. He shared that Mr. Jinte agreed to all the conditions, so he decided to join the match. After returning, he thought about just wasting his time watching TV. Those words made his friend a bit calmer. Thus, Yeep said he would only do this once, so he was trying to prepare himself. He didn't know who the trainers were, but the training wasn't great, and his friend apologized for being a terrible trainer. Even so, he got angry again and asked what he wanted him to do and why he was trying to drag him along. He said he couldn't die alone. He had no one else to take besides Heian, so it had to be him. It had been 17 years since he'd abandoned his weapon, but Yeep thought he was just afraid of embarrassing himself. He told Beck that he was going to push him so hard he would never forget his battle sense. But he mentioned he was a 48-year-old man and had been retired for 17 years. Even so, Yeep insisted he was never wrong. He assessed Beck Jiho, thinking it was true that he had become much weaker after 17 years. It wouldn't be hard to recover his skills once he got used to battle again. Seo Munyap, looking at his friend, said there would be a grueling training session the next day. Beck Jiho even sighed. He knew what was coming, and it wasn't a joke. Jinte remembered the conditions for playing. First, to be on the same team as Heian, as he didn't want to kill her even in the virtual world. Secondly, he wanted Jiho to participate with him. He knew that 2 of the 7 heroes would be together. The sponsors would go wild. Without much thought, he picked up the phone and asked for a favor. Soon, the faces of the 3 players were on every newspaper in Korea. 7 days remained until the charity match, and the 2 were training to be efficient. Yeep pushed his friend hard, aiming for him to be 0.1 seconds faster. Beck Jiho focused on delivering an attack good enough to satisfy his friend. He concentrated and went all out with maximum speed. He attempted his attack repeatedly until his friend saw he was starting to improve. Beck Jiho asked if he was better that time, but his friend reminded him he had done it 3 times already. Awkwardly, he said it had been 17 years, so it was hard for him to remember. His body was sore, as he thought he wasn't young enough for that level of training. Yeep told him that was just a warm-up compared to what they used to do before. He was in a rush because he wanted to catch up on his dramas, but his friend ruined his fun, saying he couldn't watch them because he had somewhere to go. He had to return to the association to have his avatar checked again. At that institute, he was introduced to the people responsible for overseeing it. He really had something he wanted to ask first. Why repeat the test, as he had already done it when he faced Walker, and he wanted to know what else they needed to test. They explained that precise measurements were necessary to ensure the avatar had no future issues. Yeep didn't know everything had to be that exact. They explained that all the player's attributes were scanned and transferred to the avatar. Thus, the system connected to latent skills the player might not even know they had. He found it incredible to have technology that advanced, like something ultra-secret. He also considered the possibility they were cloning the underground civilization. He thought that might be exactly what they were doing. There was some dark secret behind that association. He said that if that was the case, they should go ahead. He wanted to see everything as soon as possible. He was in a special area to measure attributes like strength, agility, and aura. He was asked to perform the first test by pulling the lever to measure his strength. So, he pulled to measure his strength. He was asked to repeat it multiple times, until they were sure of the result and probability. Everyone in the room was quite impressed, as that was the strength expected from someone called a hero. Next, they measured agility and asked if he could see the buttons on both sides of the room. He had to position himself to press the buttons alternately. Up to that point, he found it very easy to simply position himself to start the test. With impressive agility, he moved swiftly from one side to the other, leaving those in the room supervising amazed at his level of agility. The evaluation ended, and he wanted to know how many points he scored. They announced an incredible 966. He said he could achieve 970 if he tried a little harder. Then they went to the second round of evaluation. When it ended, he reached 971 points. This left everyone watching speechless because he had done exactly as he said. He asked what the maximum score allowed by that thing was. It was explained that once a member scored 1007 points, he would need to train more because the person who achieved that would also join the charity match. He thought he was fast enough to compete with Jiho at his peak. Then he asked them to tell him once more that it was worth staying there scoring points. This time, he would aim for 975. So he focused, feeling unusually good that day. After concentrating his gaze on a light, he became even more agile than before. With such agility, he moved from one side to the other almost instantly. Once again, he left everyone astonished by his incredible speed, showing himself to be much faster than before. Then the evaluation came to an end, and everyone wanted to know how many points he had scored. He believed he was faster that time, and wanted to know how many points he had achieved. He scored 1007 points, tying with Nathan, the fastest human in the world. He found it odd since he only had 97% agility. a bit less than Nathan or his friend at their peaks. He suspected he had shown skills beyond his own capacity. Excited, he wanted to evaluate his strength again. There was something he wanted to test. The strength test was about to start again, so he just focused as he had last time. And he pulled with such force that everyone in the observation room was even more surprised. He asked how many points he had scored. He had scored an unbelievable 890 points more than before. He wanted to repeat it, wanting to concentrate a bit more. He thought he could gain more points. He noticed the same thing had happened as in the agility test. His strength exceeded even the limits. However, he didn't know what had happened, as his attributes hadn't changed, but somehow he could feel it. That feeling must have come from some experience, and then he remembered. He had felt that only once before when he was alone in the last dungeon, fighting with all his strength. It was a mental force that surpassed human limits and strengthened his other abilities. Even though he didn't have to fight anymore, mental strength was important, and lately, it had been making him even stronger. He felt as though they were encouraging him to play Battlefield. Finally, they would measure his aura. He looked at the crystal ball in front of him. All he had to do was place his hand on the sphere and inject as much aura as he could. The ball would change color. He remembered that when he awakened, his aura was at 96, and to reach the remaining 4 points, he had to use various techniques, such as breathing techniques, and he went through all sorts of difficulties, but nevertheless he focused. In the observation room for the test, once again, they were impressed by his aura level. Yeep was aware that he currently had 100 aura points. He also knew that was the maximum a human could have. After finishing, they announced that the aura evaluation was complete. Even those used to high scores in tests were incredulous upon seeing his aura score. Unaware of his score, he asked how many points he had achieved so far. They told him he had broken all human records. Yeep, extremely pleased, said he had broken the record and asked who they thought he was. They told him the previous record was 1012, held by Shuran, one of the 7 like him. He was even surprised to learn she had a record, and no one had ever thought it would be broken, because, as he remembered, she was just a tough, bossy girl. They informed him that the evaluations were over and had some advice to offer. They apologized, but due to the nature of the immortal ability, it could not be used in matches. They apologized for preventing him from using all his capabilities, as the association would compensate for it. He didn't mind if they limited his abilities a bit, as he would only play 1 match anyway. Apparently somewhere, a cult was forming, asking people not to lose faith, and they finally received a revelation that confirmed the faith they had in him. They were showing everyone a paper that could hold him, displaying a picture of Seo Muniap, saying he had even refused to die and returned to save them. The cult leader was telling them to give him all their hope and faith, as the time had come to prove their belief. When he finished the tests, and was leaving the association, he came across many of them dressed in robes. He looked on, wondering who these people were, cloaked and chanting his name. His friend Baek Jiho explained that those were religious followers who worshipped him as a god. Seo Munanism was the name of the religion in which he was regarded as a deity. He remembered they were the ones standing outside the hospital when he was hospitalized. Yeep asked if they were crazy. His friend said he used to think so until he came back to life. He said now he was the one going crazy and really thought the world was ending. He felt he needed to teach them a lesson, but his friend urged him to stay calm. With a quick movement, and against his friend's wishes, he leaped and did a flip. Pausing above them, he first asked those people to be silent. However, they continued chanting his name and saying he was the hero who would save them. But after a few minutes, they decided to stay silent and listen to what he had to say. He said he understood their feelings, but he also asked them to stop all the commotion and leave. He wanted to know what kind of bizarre thing they were doing in broad daylight, and asked if they didn't have jobs. Some among them believed the savior didn't want them because they had done something wrong. Others thought it was just a test. Someone shouted that they would show him that their faith was real, and they all began chanting his name like a mantra. It even left him speechless for a moment. His friend quickly approached him, sensing things were about to escalate. Yeep, very angry, told them they had 10 seconds to disappear or else. 10 minutes later, many of them were lying on the ground, somewhat dazed. Holding one of them, he asked if they would continue worshipping him. Pleased with the answer, he told them to keep that in mind and ignore what the others said. After calming down the crowd that was protesting, he jumped back to where his friend was and said he was done. He told his friend they couldn't let them continue worshipping him as a god without permission. Beck, thinking his friend was always too extreme, asked him to stop before the reporters arrived. He told him to understand that the more he did things like this, the more reporters would chase after him. Even so, he continued, and someone shouted that he was humanity's savior. He didn't understand why people were so interested in others' lives. His friend tried to explain that's just how things were. Still, something seemed to catch his attention, and his friend knew what it was. He simply said it was nothing. The day of the charity match had arrived, At the international airport, reporters followed the celebrities eager to participate. It was remembered that it was 15 years ago, right there, that Korea's superhumans first appeared like jewels. However, he felt sad because he ended up losing the precious diamond that was Mr. Beck. The assistant reminded him that, even though Miss Shuran had shown interest, she eventually gave up. Now they were determined to bring the rarest gem, rarer than the diamond, back. They had their eyes on the superstar Yeep, but something else caught significant attention. It was Jake Rand, Europe's superhuman representative, in Battlefield. It seemed they had a certain rivalry, and as soon as he saw him, he seized the opportunity to greet Joe Fellman. Quite pleased, he said it would be a fair competition that time. Both of them now had their sights set on the world's most powerful superhuman. Another notable figure also arrived, the one responsible for destroying the Dungeon Company. The Moreau brothers, Jean and Philippe, owners of the Lumiere Battlefield Club in Paris, were there too, wanting him. They were thrilled because one of them hoped to get an autograph and a contract. The atmosphere grew tense with the presence of those 4 celebrities, all eyeing the same person. They all stared at each other, determined not to miss that opportunity at any cost. None of the 4 were willing to lose Seo Muniap. A presence caused everyone to stand still at the sound of footsteps. It was simply remarkable, a walking tactical weapon. It was a younger member of the 7 heroes. Shuran, cheerfully saying she was going to meet her friend. A crowd began to fill the entire space. He commented that humanity should have decreased in number during the war with the Undergroundists. His friend, as always, urged him to watch his words. This was a very important event. Then the 2 stepped out of the limousine, drawing the attention of everyone there to see them. Yeep was already ready to start playing that match. Beck, hearing all those people chanting his friend's name, didn't understand what made him so special. His friend said it was his fault for always speaking so highly of him and praising him. Reporters appeared from all sides, like hyenas. Beck asked his friend not to say anything strange that day. Yeep was furious when he realized his friend was using him as bait to draw the reporters' attention. Hearing all those questions coming from the reporters, he thought his friend was in serious trouble. Of all the words, the only one she heard was Miss Shuran's name. Yeep asked the reporter why she had replied that she was there to watch her little brother's game. He found her comment strange and even thought she wasn't talking about him. And as always, he was very eccentric, both in his responses and his attitude. He was asked what his real power level was and what they could expect for that day. Yeep asked his friend Beck, in front of the reporters, if he had heard that Shuran was in Korea. That's when Beck's daughter appeared and asked if it was really confirmed. Beck, placing a hand on his friend's shoulder, advised him to be careful and always carry a shield wherever he went. He even remembered having treated her poorly only once, but Beck reminded him he had used all sorts of curses. Curses that even she, who didn't understand Korean, could understand. So he thought that, after 17 years, she had probably forgotten. 17 years ago, a Chinese superhuman, Shuran, was one of those chosen to be among the 7 heroes. The only daughter of a wealthy family, possessing frightening superpowers and receiving government protection. That 17-year-old girl had been raised like a queen. She was the type who would become moony. That's when he started teasing her, always telling her to think before doing something. He would ask if her brain was melting, call her lazy, and sometimes tease her even more. He went as far as to say that a superpowered rat would be better than her, as she was stupid. Since she had superpowers, she should at least use them well, he added. Baek Hyeon was sad for them, saying that there would be 2 funerals there. Her father, in any case, wanted to leave it all behind and had other important things to think about at the moment. He called for everyone's attention, as he had an urgent announcement to make. He began by saying that most there knew what charity matches were like. But there was one player who was going to have their first battlefield match, so he would give a brief explanation of how charity matches worked. He explained that the match would be between 2 teams, Team Love and Team Hope. As everyone knew, Team Love was composed of Korean national team players, and the other team was made up of regular players. This time, with the exception of Baek Hyeon, thus, he hoped to count on him, the coach of the Korean team, and Seo Muniap, who would debut as a player. He said he was a bit worried because it had been a long time since he last used the weapon, and he hoped they would all manage. The captain of Team Hope, Park Kyeol-ho, told the coach not to worry, as he would work hard. Yeep thought that, no matter how much time passed, his friend Baek Ji-ho was still the best. Looking at the attributes of his friend and his daughter, he realized the 3 of them could easily win. Looking at the others, there was nothing special. However, there was also someone else who was trained with interesting percentages. Observing his aura concentration, resilience, as well as strength at his limit, they were at 90. Then he called him over for a closer look. The young man asked if something was wrong and said his name was Choi Hyuk. It seemed the position didn't match his abilities. He found it odd and asked if he wasn't ranked. He commented that, when he was younger, he would have liked to be ranked like him, but because of his short stature, he couldn't make it. Yeep thought he still didn't know about the skill to strengthen resilience, so he ended up becoming just a DPS. He thought the guy's trainers must have trained him wrong, judging only by his appearance. So he asked someone to get him a shield. He handed it to the young man, who was confused about what he was thinking. Seeing the boy's confusion, he decided to give him some quick advice. He told him to step out from behind the shield, attack, and quickly hide behind it again, and to keep repeating that. The young man thought he had heard that he was strict, but he didn't know he was that strict. The young man was asking the coach if they could really continue with someone like him on the team. The coach shouted that they would go with 4 tanks, 6 DPS, and 1 support. The young man was terrified, thinking the coach had also abandoned him. He only put on his equipment, and noticed it was light but just as sturdy as the armor he used in the war. He asked his friend if he was okay. He replied that he felt awkward because he didn't know he'd have to wear the uniforms. He mentioned that the weapons wouldn't be an issue, as they'd made small adjustments to a weapon he'd used before. Yeep just observed his friend Baek Jiho, looking all clumsy. Looking closely, he thought the repairs were well done. They must have paid a lot of attention while doing it. His friend warned him not to let his guard down. He knew he was strong, but before he fought monsters, and people were trained to fight humans, even if their abilities were inferior. Yeep joked with his friend that he would keep that in mind, calling him Coach. He said that, considering what his friend had said, he would assess the talents of the other players. The Love Team's fanbase was already prepared to welcome them. Yeep observed everyone and knew they were above the team's average score of 60, which was odd because they weren't that much better. Yeep asked his friend if he separated the players by levels. He realized they used the general scoring method. Those who stood out in only one area naturally wouldn't be chosen. Someone chewing gum caught his attention. He thought he wasn't bad, but his mental strength was trash. He thought the limit of 60 was quite low, but this one had only developed to 26. He stopped observing when the guy called him Uncle. When he asked if he was talking to him, he replied yes. That kid was definitely not one of his crazed fans. He remembered him from the match against the United States. But what could a dinosaur from the underground war times know about anything? He didn't even know what Battlefield was. At that moment, his friend had to step in, knowing Yeep would do something odd. However, they met when they were at the tunnel exit. Yeep teased him, asking if he had a problem with him. Of course, he had shown off in the last match against the United States. He had never played Battlefield before and didn't know a thing. The kid looked at him and asked what was so funny, even if it was just a game. That's when he asked what his father did, and the kid replied that he was the association's vice president. To him, it made sense why a kid with no talent was among them. The alarm sounded for them to enter the field. However, the kid wanted to know why he was talking about his father. He responded that he wanted to know what kind of person his father was to raise someone like him, a crybaby. Very annoyed, he said his upbringing had been very tough. That's why he hated brats like him. Yeep replied that because of him, he'd gotten pretty fired up for the match. The players were already entering, and Seo Muniap's name was being chanted like a song. They announced that the much-anticipated moment had arrived. Seo Muniap had finally entered. In Battlefield, as a player, even if it was just a charity match. Many celebrities were in the audience. Gerald Walker, Joe Fellman, Jake Ladd, the Moore brothers, and Shuran. The commentators reported that the match would take place in the Spectral Cave of Azura, a dungeon with 3 rings and a central area, where going deeper, there were monsters like skeletons and serpents. It was made up of national team players, the Love Team, and heroes from 17 years ago in the Hope Team. 10 minutes earlier, Baek Jiho was trying to explain the plan. For them, the Hope Team's starting point would be Zone 5. The Love Team would start in Zone 1. They would start in opposite positions. Once they cleared Zone 1, they could stop at 5-2. The team's main strength would be at 5-2, hunting, while Seo Muniap would go solo for the day. He explained that the serpent was a boss in the zone. Upon encountering and defeating it, all Zone 5 areas would collapse. Then they would go to Zone 6 and pass through a narrow passage. From there, the direct combat would begin. Yeep thought that, although Baek Jiho wasn't in his best condition after working hard as the team's coach, since the Battlefield matches were best of 3, they would play the first set cautiously, and in the second set Zone 5-1, as the Hope Team's coach instructed them to go to their positions. Baek Haeyeon would be the main DPS in the rear, with Baek Jiho as the assisting DPS in the vanguard, Seo Muniap as the vanguard rank and Choi Hoyak as the vanguard tank. Yeep, seeing what awaited, smiled, as it had been a long time since he'd seen something like this, and he asked everyone to look at the ceiling. Zone 1-1, the starting point of the Love Team, where Captain Chai Woohyun told them to go all out. Yansa said he was already on it, and released massive amounts of fire. This is DPS Shim Yongsu. As he attacked, he remembered Seo Muniap had asked who he was. He was determined not to leave him alone, no matter what happened. That's why he was focused on facing those beings to reach the player and attack him. He thought he could handle him on his own. Meanwhile, Yeep was covering his friend Jiho, who was on top of the shield, being launched by him at an astonishing speed, giving him enough momentum to quickly clear that area. When the momentum ran out, he said he was falling. His friend, Quicker, caught him with his shield again. The commentators were impressed because the legendary duo was still incredible. They were being wiped out by those two in no time, who had already taken care of the ones on the ceiling. Now, very excited, they moved on to finish off those on the ground. Proving to be a fantastic duo, they were easily eliminating those creatures. A young teammate of theirs was watching how they destroyed the arachnes. He thought that if he couldn't break through their hard shells, it was as if no attack had been made. And yet he was able to discard them so easily. Seo Munyap didn't even look that strong, but he understood that he had one of the superpowers. The first time he used the shield, he wasn't very accustomed to it, so he only used weapon skills. But he thought he should use aura concentration on the shield as well. He was willing to try. Excited by the duo, he went to attack too. He also wanted to destroy those creatures, to be as strong as that duo. Meanwhile, in a luxury box in the stands, the brothers were watching the star of the game. They commented that this was Seo Munyap's signature move, the 100-meter throw. Ms. Shuren thought it was just a technique that left no room for error when throwing and catching a spear again. She knew that 17 years ago, and even now, he was very irritating. She was satisfied and asked if he had already finished them all, but she felt a presence. She turned around, saw there was one more, and finished it with her shield and spear. She wanted it to be over soon because she needed to leave. Now they had finally cleared Zone 5-1. They were asked to keep up the hard work. Now, everyone would head to Zone 5-2. For a moment, he looked for his friend Seo Munyap, but was told that as soon as he finished, he ran ahead. All he said was that, as planned, he was going to Zone 5-3 and for the others to hurry up. Beck asked them not to think he was impossible. He was the type to act very cautiously. Then he asked everyone to move on to Zone 5-2. In Zone 5-3 was the boss, a beastly serpent, and he said it had been a long time. He said it felt like just yesterday that his Hyung had attacked it. Then he began to concentrate, knowing that this would allow him to release more power on a large scale. The giant serpent didn't seem to want things to end so quickly either. The two began a clash, attacking and dodging. Seo Munyap was impressed when he realized he had already arrived. The rest of the team said they thought it would take him a little longer to clear the area. He said this while sitting on top of the serpent he had defeated alone. In the clash, the more monsters or enemy team members he defeated, the stronger he became. He told them they could handle things on their own from there. He just asked for Baek Jiho and Baek Hyeon to come with him. Smiling, he said he had a great task for the three of them. After handing over the defeated serpent to the other members, the three Hope Team players moved on. Seo thought that when he hunted that serpent just now, one strike was enough to nearly destroy it. He realized that Battlefield has a hunting points system, but since he only took down a few arachnes, his aura was currently blue, the first of 5 levels, so all that power must have been due to the 110 strength points. His friend asked why he hadn't given any orders yet, even if he had a plan. The plan was, when he saw that guy who looked like Shuran from the opposing team, he thought of something. Of course, there was no guarantee they would face that guy, so if he wasn't there, he would analyze the situation. In Zone 12, the Love team was satisfied. As they had finished clearing Zone 12, the hunt was complete. They would switch to a 5-6 formation. The captain was quite excited. The 5-person team would go to Zone 9, and the 6-person team would go to Zone 11. They were rushing off to their respective locations. In Zone 9, the Love team, with a 5-member team, was facing arachnes, and the young man in question was in that team, feeling pleased. Because thanks to all the hunting points he accumulated, his aura was purple. He thought he was now a match for Seo Munyap. Meanwhile, the others were calling him to move on to the next zone. He was still thinking about how strong he was when someone shouted for him to be careful. He hadn't noticed that while he was focused on an opponent, they were launching a surprise attack. Only after being hit did he realize they were under surprise attack from the enemy. In Zone 11, the Love team, with 6 members, received the communication that they had been hit by a surprise attack. They were preparing to go give support when they, too, began to be attacked. The previous orders were that after finishing off the serpent, they would approach the enemy team using an opposite route. They thought it wouldn't be easy, considering they were up against the country's representatives, but they still managed to finish everything. He said he would wrap up what he needed to do and would help in an instant. The incredible duo was ready to attack again. Baek Jiho was once again on top of the shield and was about to be launched by his friend. He told them to be careful because he would be upset if he lost. He stopped holding back, as he was about to launch him right then. It ended up being a spectacular throw, and soon after he threw his spear. Still holding his shield, everyone noticed he was heading toward Jiangsu. He told the team to block that, but at this point, nothing could stop it. He had used the teleport. They were warned to be cautious. Someone was trying to catch Coach Baek Jiho off guard, but a spear simply stopped them. They were trying to stop him before the teleport cooldown was over. However, his daughter came to his defense, wrapping her whip around his waist to pull him back. They formed yet another successful duo. Baek Hyeon threw him so far that he landed close to Yeep. He watched the beautiful play the girl had just made. He took the opportunity to ask if he was finding it exciting to do this after so long. Yeep noticed that with that move, he had finished off all the tanks, so they could go for a 3 versus 3. The last 3 remaining weren't too thrilled, as they were about to be hunted down. Looking at the guy from earlier, he said he would hunt them down one by one. They were commenting that, while pretending to target Shim Yangsu, they took out 2 other players. Seo Munyap's first takedown was also very impressive. He hit the player with precision and high speed. And now, even while they were talking, he had just thrown Baek Jiho again. They already had their next target in sight. Next, Seo Munyap appeared right in front of Shim Yangsu. He threw his shield into his face and asked if he was satisfied now, adding another takedown to the game, with Baek Jiho at 3 kills and Seo Munyap at 2. The rest of the team was in shock, as 5 of them had already been taken down. They couldn't believe all 5 had been taken out in just a few minutes. However, they thought that if they won there, they could turn the game back in their favor. The leader shouted for them to go all out because they were the national team. The kid who was getting used to the shield was trying to remember the quick lesson he had received, and it seemed to be working. He was managing to defend himself and attack at the same time. They thought he was a last-minute rank selection, but how did he have such a strong defense? It was hard to believe he was a beginner tank. When he went into the clash, he knew he would have to block quickly. It was at that moment that Seo Munyap scored his 3rd kill, and he acknowledged the good work of young Choi Hoak and said he could leave the rest to them. He thought the 3 of them could finish everything in 5 minutes and then move on to the next match. The first set ended with a victory for Team Hope, 8-0, and the MVP of the first set was Baek Jiho. In Team Hope's room, everyone was impressed with the coach's skills. Baek Jiho was a bit embarrassed to be a battlefield player at his age. He thought it would be fun to wield a weapon again after 17 years. Also, much of that fun was probably because of his friend Yeep, and he was glued to his phone, checking for news about his favorite dramas. The arena for the second set would be announced. This time, the players would go into a dungeon with staircases. They would even face gravity 10 times stronger than normal in the Labyrinth of the Dead. This dungeon had been the downfall of many superhumans in the past, even for Seo Munyap. Everyone was eager to see the performance of the first person to complete the Labyrinth of the Dead. Seo Munyap was walking, remembering that somehow he had faced many difficulties. Ever since he returned from that last dungeon, from Walker to those reporters and even the cult that worshipped him, they were all people who doubted or praised his achievements. He knew everyone there wanted to see his abilities. He was ready to show the skills everyone was eager to witness. It would be a bit different from what everyone was imagining. The Labyrinth of the Dead was Team Hope's starting point before they began some announcements. Baek Jiho told everyone that the Labyrinth of the Dead was a very complicated dungeon. Seo Munyap announced that this time, he would be going alone, so they should handle the rest. Baek Jiho asked if Yeep was sure he still remembered the labyrinth's structure, but he had only been there a year ago. The coach knew that no one knew that place better than him, so he trusted that everything would be fine. Seo Munyap would take this match more seriously if the opposing team had started on the other side. It was more than obvious where he was going, and he simply took off. Leaving Baek Hyeon worried, she asked her father if it was okay to let him go alone. He asked his daughter to calm down, as no one could come close to Yeep's level. He also said she would soon understand. Baek Hyeon was impressed, as he was truly incredible. His coach and friend, although he believed in him, still feared for his friend. Meanwhile, Seo Munyap was speeding toward his goal, but with caution, as he was always observing what was ahead, and soon he spotted the enemies. He felt happy, as memories were coming back. Seeing the monsters before him, he was glad to encounter them again. This was the life he had been used to for over 17 years. He felt good being there, and now he could show his full potential fighting those dungeon monsters. His happiness and well-being were noticeable. Although it was just a battlefield match, he could use it to relive some moments of the past. That Labyrinth of the Dead was exactly 18 years old, but for him, only a year had passed. Floors and stairs with gravity increased tenfold. If you didn't know how to maneuver there, it would be difficult, and you might even fall, but for him, it was easy, and he could move lightly to attack as much as he wanted, as long as he knew where to go. For someone who had lived through everything that was shown in a game, he could find great shortcuts. His speed disturbed the dungeon monsters. However, the shortcuts led him right to the enemy team, who found it strange since it hadn't even been 10 minutes since the match started. But he said he had learned everything about the opponents just from the first match. Now, he would likely put everything he learned into practice. He only asked that they accept their defeat. The captain urged his teammates not to panic. they could retreat. They said there was no way he could have arrived there alone, so he asked them to pull back quickly. Meanwhile, Seo Muniap found them all pathetic, but their decision wasn't the worst. He knew the match would have ended if they had insisted on attacking him. As a reward for their hesitation, he would play with them a bit more. He began to assess their skills. Based on that, he would decide who to attack first. His target didn't take long to engage him, thus earning his first takedown. He knew the target wouldn't be able to dodge because his agility was 51 out of 54. It was a shame he couldn't recover the spear, but the other 3 should be enough. He noticed that all the others fled, so he would have to hunt them down. At a certain point, thinking they were far from danger, they decided to rest a bit. They were talking among themselves, wondering how he had arrived there so suddenly. It happened so fast that none of them noticed his presence, but if someone else had been hiding, it would have been an irreparable loss. They were apprehensive, knowing they could be attacked at any moment. Meanwhile, the commentators were going wild. Seo Muniap's play had risen again. The place they went after fleeing, considering their speed and taking everything into account. He thought he might be there. The chances were 50%. However, it was worth trying to energize his spear. He aimed for the perfect shot. He enjoyed himself, thinking that the thrill was back. Having done all this, he threw the spear in the direction he wanted. As it neared the intended location, the spear lit up high above. Then, as it hit the ground, it illuminated everything around, leaving everyone shocked, including the commentators, who found the scene incredible and unbelievable. He had scored 2 takedowns. The commentators were thrilled to narrate what they had just witnessed. It was the most incredible takedown in battlefield history. When the spear hit the ground, its power and energy shattered the surrounding ground. At that moment, one of the players realized that fleeing was pointless. They would have to face him. He realized that if they left him unchecked like that, they wouldn't be able to hunt anything else. The coach urged Shim Yangsu to stay calm. Sending a scouting team would only scatter them further. Meanwhile, he was watching from above as they argued. The young Shim Yangsu, who was very upset, thought he could go after him and fry him with his superpowers. He was frustrated because his team didn't accept anything. He threw a fireball near where Seo Muniap was. He watched to see if he managed to hit him. Feeling quite confident, he said that he was just showing off and always knew he was there. Seo Muniap, calling him a crude name, made it clear he was perfectly fine. He just stood up with his shield and was even laughing at them. He stated he'd made noise on purpose so they could notice. He also told him he was a terrible actor and should consider enrolling in an acting school. The young man became apprehensive as his opponent had stopped his power so easily. Everyone realized that Yangsu's power and aura were at a level rivaling the best in the league. That's why he was the main DPS of the national team. His attacks were unblockable. Seeing this, they all agreed that they should go for Seo Muniap first. They already had a strategy laid out, so no matter how strong he was, it wouldn't be easy for him to handle 3 DPS alone. Once they accumulated enough hunting points, they would join in and help capture him. It seemed that the Love Team players had split up and were trying to surround Seo Muniap. They knew he was a player who knew the geography of the Labyrinth of the Dead better than anyone. Surrounding one of them, he said that plan was too obvious. He also said they were more disappointing than he had expected. Seo Muniap had advanced toward the 3 DPS of the Love Team. It was noticeable by the energy bursts he left behind. He always enjoyed the reactions his opponents had when they saw him approaching. He caught all 3 DPS off guard. He even laughed at them, as they weren't the perfect prey. He completed his 3rd takedown there. He loved his favorite move, the 100 centimeters throw. And there was the 4th takedown by Seo Muniap. Looking at the last of the 3 DPS, he warned that it was now his turn. Being scared didn't help his situation at all. Trying to run didn't help either, as Seo Muniap completed his 5th takedown. He paused to reflect and noted that with 5 takedowns, 6 more were needed to finish. Smiling, he said he would take them all down. In the stands, everyone was stunned by his skill and agility. It was surprising, as the clash ended in an instant, and everyone was already calculating what the outcome would be if the heroes of the past faced their current players. After the match against Walker, they thought they might get an answer that day. The superhuman, his companion from many years ago, realized that he had truly returned. With the 5 takedowns, his aura had already turned red. Communicating with the coach, he informed him that they would meet up with him in Zone 3-1. He replied that the match would already be over by the time they got there. He also asked them to stop talking to him now, as he was about to fight. Already throwing his spear in the opponent's direction, he went in for the game-winning play. Boldly, he asked if he'd made them wait too long. He'd come as quickly as he could. They shouted not to panic, saying they still had a chance. Seo Muniap, seeing their movements, asked if they had planned anything else, and he watched to see what it would be. However, they just surrounded him, launching an attack. He thought that even if they used the circle formation, the first to attack was always someone with high mobility and speed. That's why he was watching their abilities closely. Thus, It was easy to identify who had acquired more skills in that regard. He noticed his opponent's power was impressive, allowing him to increase agility to 102.7, even if only temporarily. If, for 30 seconds, he could move faster than any other superhuman. If that was the case, why were international league matches so drawn out? No matter how fast he could be or how fast his body could move, the brain's reaction speed remained the same. And with that, he secured his 6th takedown, leaving the rest of them desperate and breaking their circle formation. They were soon ordered to start firing explosive spheres at him. They did so and began bombarding him with explosive spheres. They thought they had blocked his field of vision and called for Jin Hyun to attack him. He dashed forward to try and reach him, thinking his vision was blocked. That was exactly what he had been waiting for, precisely that attack. Thus, the one who attacked him became his 7th takedown, leaving the others even more confused and perplexed, as they thought it was all impossible. Before them was a battlefield match monster. Immediately after, he secured the 8th takedown, followed by the 9th. Now he was once again checking to see who would be next. It seemed things were starting to get interesting. It was now 2 against 1. Shim Yamsu was beginning to feel the pressure, and his body was trembling a lot. They thought even facing France wasn't like this. However, there were still 2 remaining, and he was calmly observing each one's abilities. Yet, he found Chai Woo-hyun's skills interesting, although his superpower was terrible. The 2 were trying to plan something to gain an advantage. However, he was the first to get hit. Seo Muniap didn't like it when he interrupted. He made an example of him, and also scored the 10th takedown. Now only the young players Shin Haesung and Seo Muniap remained. Terrified, he screamed for him not to come closer and begged him to leave. But he held a grudge, as he didn't appreciate the boy's attitude before the match started. He landed a powerful blow with his shield, making him the 11th takedown. That was also an unbelievable scene in the history of Korean Battlefield. It was the first single-player all-kill. After the first set, the second set also had an incredible scene, the first all-kill in Korean Battlefield. The spectators were going wild, even though they were missing the team's ace, Baek Ji-ho. Seo Muniap exceeded everyone's expectations, as they thought it would take him longer to adapt. Everyone was going crazy, chanting the name of a single player. Pointing to the sky, Yeep asked Ji-ho what that thing in the sky was. He replied it was a drone, a camera that could film while flying. He was very emotional, realizing they were watching live, so much so that he even held up one of his fingers. Baek Ji-ho asked him what was on his mind and begged him to listen. Dragging his friend, he asked him to come along and said he'd have to give an MVP interview. The interviewer, Lee Young-hee, said it was a pleasure to have them there. Politely, Ji-ho introduced himself, saying it was his first time participating as a player. She added that both had incredible performances, but she wanted to start with a question for the MVP of the first set, Baek Ji-ho, and asked if he expected to deliver such an impactful performance. Briefly, he explained that he only participated because his friend Seo Muniap forced him. The interviewer then said she'd follow up with a question for Seo Muniap. She began by praising his incredible work in the second set and asked if he expected to achieve an all-kill. He replied that he knew it would be easy if he did it himself. The next question was if he'd mind giving some advice to the disheartened players of Team Love. He said that, in fact, he thought their biggest problem lay in technical leadership. When asked if he thought he could be their new coach, he replied that those guys were at a low level. However, he said that with the right incentive, he might even change his mind, as the world was very capitalist. Seo Muniap asked where they were going, as that wasn't the way home. He was furious because he wanted to rewatch a very good drama. Yeep was annoyed, saying he'd be bored to death. Baek Ji-ho asked him to stop complaining for a moment. Baek Ji-ho asked why he said that in the interview. He thought he wasn't interested in Battlefield. Yeep asked why he had created a team where players weren't in the best positions for them. He thought that, after 11 years as Seo Muniap's assistant, he wanted to be a coach. Even one of the 7 Heroes teammates was inspired and became a world-renowned coach. Seo Muniap shared that after that day's match, he realized there weren't good leaders in the country. He said that if they paid him well, he'd help, only because he was the coach. He said, to start with, he'd give some advice and asked him to follow his instructions. First, he should put Choi Hyuk in the tank position. Second, he should use Yu Byoko as a wildcard. And third, instead of placing Chai Woo-hyun as the forward rank, place him as the rear support rank. And finally, he should expel the vice director's son. However, he said he couldn't expel him. Yeep asked if it was out of fear, and he replied no, as he was also one of the 7 heroes. He simply said he didn't find it reason enough to remove him, as his superpower was incredible. Seo Muniap noted that his mental strength level was terrible, and that his team suffered all the time. He said his advice was done, and that he could notify the association director. So, the two arrived at Hunter's Hotel, where Baek Haeyeon was waiting for him. She quickly said there was a lot to drink there, and that the vodka was very good. Seo Muniap was mad at her, as she shouldn't be drinking, She said she learned to like vodka because it was his favorite. It was just an act now that her father had left, and the two could drink until they dropped. All eyes were on him, watching his every move. Joe Feldman thought it was absurd that people had come from all over the world. He thought about approaching him, but decided to take it slowly. Still, another person had the courage to go up to Seo Muniap, and he immediately recognized him. It was his longtime friend, Jake Ladd. However, he immediately got scolded for pronouncing his last name wrong. Joe Feldman, watching from afar, was angry but tried not to show it. He took it easy because Seo was different from others, having lost 17 years on Earth. His friend and agent handed him a card, saying he might find it interesting. Baek Hyeon was impressed to know that he also spoke English, even though he'd left school at 13. However, she apologized, thinking he hadn't learned anything. He started laughing at her and asked if she knew much herself. Joe Feldman was pleased, as his rival had already left. Now he could approach Seo Muniap, but just then, the brothers overtook him. They came up to him as if they'd known him for a long time and even asked if he could speak English. He replied that he also spoke French, which excited the two of them. Baek Hyeon warned him that the brothers no longer worked in that field but instead ran a battlefield club. She mentioned that Nathan Bernard, one of the top 3 players in the world, was from that club. Very annoyed, he asked them, since they owned a club, if they were also there to try their luck. They said they weren't there to pressure her into anything she didn't want, but if she wanted to, they'd be very happy. Their interest was in the beautiful mademoiselle, and they pointed at Baek Hyeon. Pointing, he asked if they wanted to hire her. She, quite excited, said it was an honor, but Seo Muniap told her to stop being so easy. He found it strange that they hadn't come there for him but for Baek Hyeon. They said that when her position was recently changed to melee DPS, it greatly improved her strength with fencing. They were sure she'd be a great addition to their team. They said he, too, would be very welcome if he wanted to join. Their energy was tremendous. Or if he ever thought of becoming a player, he might consider that offer. He already knew Battlefield paid well, and it would be a dream to get a player that everyone wanted. And since he'd been a fan for a long time, he wanted to give him a gift. Seo Muniap would accept anything if it was free. They told him to hold on to it as they stepped out for a moment. They left quickly and said they'd be right back. Seo Muniap said he was getting tired of talking and it would be best to take a break. He pulled Baek Hyeon along and said they'd go have some vodka. Then someone else came over, wanting to talk to him. They served him a drink. Annoyed, he asked who it was now, and the person said they'd like to speak with him for a moment. He introduced himself as Yang Minyang, secretary of the Blue House. He was frustrated because even the Blue House wanted to talk to him. He asked if he'd heard about the superhuman merit system. He said he hadn't heard much about it, but the system had been active for 17 years. They wanted to pay the 17 years of accumulated pension he hadn't received. They would give exactly 2,568,000,000 won, all tax-free. The 2.5 billion caught his attention. He thought that if he added this money to what he'd received from the government, and what Walker paid him, he'd amassed quite a sum without even noticing. Joe Feldman also wanted a bit of his attention. Seo Muniap turned to him, and asked if he also had a recruitment offer. He said he only needed one thing. He told him he hadn't adapted to this world. For saving everyone, he'd lost 17 years. He explained that the underground population no longer existed, and his problems could be solved. He said that, over time, he'd find his place and discover a new purpose. He told him he'd soon get used to the peaceful world. However, if he ever felt out of place, he could call him. He just walked away and asked his assistant if he just said something that made no sense. Seo Muniap thought that guy was very strange and what he said didn't make sense. Baek Hyeon explained that he was in the US Major League, and people called him the ghost of money. Seo Muniap wondered why he wasn't talking about money but about strange things. She explained that her father had said he wasn't to be taken lightly after he'd tried recruiting him. Finally, they arrived at the big event of the evening, which began with the presentation of donations. It was said that he would be responsible for delivering the thank you speech for the donations and was the top donor. They were talking about Seo Muniap. They requested his presence on stage, and he walked slowly toward it. He asked if he was really the top donor that day and also inquired about the size of his fortune, 1.74 trillion won, and he added that it was to support the maintenance of the charity center. He shared that the president of the Battlefield Association had kindly spoken about the event, but he hadn't expected it to be such a big deal. In fact, he just discovered that he would receive 2.5 billion from the government for backdated pension. He joked that it was funny to feel happy about a couple of million when his original fortune was 1 trillion. He explained that 17 years had passed since all his assets had been donated, as he had just returned from that last dungeon. And many things had changed since then. Everyone talked about how he saved the world, praising his noble sacrifice. He said there was nothing noble about it, he genuinely just enjoyed going into dungeons. There were moments when he wished the underground civilization hadn't been defeated so he could keep facing opponents. So, even though everyone praised him for saving the world, he didn't feel it was right. He wasn't proud of it, he just felt like his fun had ended. The fact that the children helped with that money could now grow into adults was far more fulfilling than merely saving the world. He hoped there would never again be sad children like he was. After that, he left to continue with the event. He heard someone say that an idiot never changes. It was Jinte, asking if 1.7 trillion won would compensate for that behavior. He also told him to stop using his childhood as an excuse since he knew his childhood had been normal. He asked if he really had to humiliate the national team like that. He said the charity match was horrible. Now, the Korean Battlefield League was just a bunch of kids. Angry, he said the government treated superhumans like monsters because of a certain someone and had always given very little support. He explained that most of the time, it was his fault for attacking members of parliament and constantly being in the news. Due to politicians' views on superhumans, their image had worsened. Jinte then asked if he wanted to join the national team as an assistant coach. He said he wanted to negotiate the salary, but Jinte replied that would be difficult. There was something he wanted to do. In the car, Baek Jiho said he was going to own a team. As a Korean, his heart broke because all the national team players were very bad. The sudden change was shocking. He'd never been so patriotic before. He mentioned that the team in last place in the KB League cost over 20 billion. However, he thought it might be easier to make money with a second division team. This made Baek Jiho realize that he only wanted to do this for the money, and as he said, things were always that way. They had arrived at their destination, and he was told he could get out, but something seemed to catch Seo Muniop's attention. He wanted to know who that person was standing there. Jiho was startled when he saw Shuran, feeling awkward, and asked what she was doing there. She didn't answer and just stared at Seo Muniop. He observed her, and wondered what she might be thinking, with that totally expressionless face. Upon evaluating her, he realized she had all her superpowers at their limit, and had gained a new power, the ability to locate. She was much stronger than before. He asked what she was doing there all of a sudden. She replied that after hearing the news that he had become immortal, she felt like killing him at least once. She asked if he held any grudge against her after all that time, but she said she held no grudge and had already forgiven all the cruelty he had done to her. With evident rudeness, he asked what she was doing there. She simply said she wanted to see with her own eyes if he had really returned. She said that now that she'd seen him, she was leaving. He shouted, asking for the real reason. He also asked if she'd gone crazy and if she would admit that it was all her fault. However, everything was very difficult. She wanted to go home and was already at her limit. Not to mention that monsters appeared constantly, threatening her existence. She needed to open the portal quickly but couldn't activate the extinction beam due to fatigue. She remembered him telling her that was all she had, and after saving her, he asked if everything was okay. Currently, he was where he'd been and knew he had truly returned. He was satisfied because the money had finally been deposited into his account. Baek Jiho wanted to know if he was really going to buy a battlefield team. He said he'd take the opportunity to try out a new hobby to make money. Jiho said that if he truly wanted to buy a club, he should talk to him because, alone, he didn't think he'd manage. He said that it wouldn't be fun otherwise. He understood what KB1 and KB2 were, but what was KB7? He explained that since it was cheaper to enter KB7, it had better cost-benefit. The 11-player league attracted much more attention because talented players preferred the KB2 league, so he said he'd rather buy a KB2 team and that it would be better to buy one quickly. Baek asked if he knew how to do that. He said it was just a matter of asking the association president. The association president explained that the reason he didn't want to be the national team coach was to have his own team approved. He mentioned that there were currently 3 teams available for sale, and one of them had just been put on the market. Seo Muniop wanted to know where they could meet. Arriving at a modest club, he asked if this was the place. Hanjong team was a distinct team with very few followers, and even those were quite frustrated. He was blending in, and with his hat and mask on, he thought no one would recognize him like that. People nearby asked why he was covering his face and wearing such a strange coat. They decided to sit far from him. Looking at that team, he realized they were terrible, so the second division must be even worse. The players from both teams were entering the match. As the players came in, he evaluated them as mediocre and terrible. He used his skill to try to find some talent among them. After looking at a tall, skinny guy, he thought he might be a good support. Just from looking at his superpower, he knew he'd make an excellent support. However, his skill level was at 74 out of 95, meaning he had plenty of room to improve. He thought that if no one guided him in the right direction, he'd never discover his true aptitude. Looking at another player, he noticed his strength and endurance were at 87 and 85, just like Chai Woo-hyun from the national team. His superpower was good, a common skill, but it boosted his attributes significantly. Still, he couldn't feel pleased about finding at least 2 good players. Then, a girl took his breath away. Lee Naeon's jump was so impressive that she could rival a specialist. He thought she couldn't be that bad. If he placed her in the air, it wouldn't be a problem for her to move around. He observed everyone's skills for over an hour. In the end, the game was 6-4. They were truly awful. He thought the worse they were, the better it would be for growth. He called the president, who asked if he'd made a decision. He said yes, he was going to buy. 2 days later, at the Battlefield Association in Korea, they were finalizing the arrangements for the team. They offered him support for whatever he needed, and the news had already been published in the newspapers. Jin-tae congratulated him on acquiring the KB2 team, although he didn't think it was anything to be congratulated for. Jin-tae asked what he intended to do with the team. He replied that he'd let them do what they did best and would occasionally check in on the players. He said the negotiations were already done, so he'd be leaving. He was laughing because he had many places to go and didn't want to depend on Jiho's rides every day. That's why he spent what was left after buying the team on that beauty. A fast and powerful motorcycle was exactly what he needed to get around. People on the road questioned why he was riding like that, especially without a helmet. He sped past all the cars without a care. All the drivers he passed by, upon realizing who he was, were happy to see him. So if Seo Munyap could even pull off something like this, he quickly arrived at the Hanjong Club headquarters. He thought the structure was terrible, but at least it was spacious. He asked a janitor to approach him, saying it was strange they were in that place. The janitor apologized, saying he hadn't expected him to visit so late. Observing the coach's skill, he realized he was a superhuman. Seo Munyap asked him how old he was, and he replied, 43. He commented that he was 4 years older than him, and he was happy with him because one was from 1976 and the other from 1980. He began showing him around the facilities and the infrastructure, including dormitories, offices, and the gym. They were happy, and it seemed that all the basic needs were met there. Finally, he showed him the training room. It was a large, very old place, but it only had 11 training modules. He explained that the modules were so expensive that they barely had money to buy them for the 11 starting players. He didn't like those small things, but he appreciated the coach for having recovery and motivation skills. He wanted to start by talking to the players. He would forget about it immediately and could call them all together. He began by speaking with a player, introducing himself as the new team owner. She said her name was Lee Naeon and that it was an honor to meet the owner. He thought she really did resemble a flea and asked if she practiced archery. She was surprised by his question, but he clarified that he could tell from the calluses on her hands. He told her it must be tough. No matter how much effort she put in, her skills didn't improve. He noticed her skill level was quite low, which would keep her stuck in the second division. He told her he was going to turn her into a main league player. He said that would be the concept, and her role would be that of a disruptor, to unsettle the enemy's mindset. She couldn't improve, no matter what she did. She had already lost hope. Seo Munyap warned her that she was fired. He thought that if she agreed to this, it wouldn't really end like that. However, he told her not to worry, as he wouldn't let her off that easily, because he had said he would turn her into a pro league player. He told her that, from what he could see, she had some talent, maybe for archery. Seeing her expression, he asked what kind of superhuman couldn't use their skills to the fullest. Her talent wouldn't be about that, it was about running. When he said it was running, she seemed relieved and was told to focus simply on running. He said that if she could create chaos for the enemies by running and shooting with her bow. After hearing what he said, she asked if she was supposed to play like a reckless player. He said it would be a bother for the hunt, and that they wouldn't leave her alone. He summed it up by telling her to disrupt those players. She asked him if, by really doing this, she could become an essential player. He said that if she did well, she could even make it onto the national team. Very excited, she kept asking if what he was saying was true. She thought it was her dream to be an essential player on the national team. Radiantly, she thanked him, saying she would really do her best, and asked him to call Namkung Juhun. Someone knocked on the door, and he said they could come in. Turning around, he saw it was who he had been waiting for. The tall, skinny guy introduced himself as a support, and said it was an honor to meet him. He thought it was the first time he'd seen someone so skinny among superhumans, and that the team had a lot of players. Quickly, he told him that he wouldn't be a support anymore. He said he had always been a support. Seo Munyap looked at Namkung Juhun, and told him he wasn't a support anymore. The strange key had been summoned suddenly just to be told he wasn't a support anymore. Seo Munyap told him he saw him fitting as a melee player. He told him he had talent for fencing and that he wasn't saying it randomly. He said he wouldn't be able to lead a team without being sure of what he was doing. The player thought his agility and reaction speed were low. Yeep said that's why he'd stay back and use his superpower. When he tried to question, he realized just how firm Seo Muniop could be. He also said he disliked most supports because 9 out of 10 just stayed in the back and didn't fight. However, that 1 in 10 was the person capable of being a support. As long as they had at least 2 support superpowers, even those guys just stayed behind. But this player only had protection, so he was going to give him a weapon. He found it strange, saying he'd turn him into a support who could use weapons. At a certain point, he lost his patience and grabbed the player by the collar, saying he was a superhuman. He asked why he was so determined to be just a support. Maybe he was afraid to fight. He observed that he would never be able to advance in life with that mindset. He asked if he really believed he could succeed by doing that. He said the outcome could change depending on effort. The player wanted to know what would happen if he continued as a support. He said he would be fired. He asked him what he would do, whether he preferred living as a substitute on one of the league's worst teams, or if he wanted to change his life. At that moment, the player firmly said he'd become a melee player. Someone else arrived and asked if the team owner had finished his business. It was the coach, and he took the opportunity to ask if he knew anyone good with swords. He needed someone to teach fencing to Namkung Jihun. The coach thought it was odd, as he was a support. However, he was informed that he was no longer a support, and had become a melee player. He announced he was leaving and needed Lee Naeon to learn running, so he asked to arrange that as well. He told them to increase the endurance of the first team's players. He left that place, got on his motorcycle, and thought he couldn't let the day end like that. He was still thinking about it the next day. Baek Jiho asked if he was looking for something, as he seemed worried about something. He said he only had 14 players, and they needed to find more. He mentioned that he was recruiting new players. Baek Jiho wanted to know where he was headed. He said he was going to recruit, that he could probably recruit a few. At times like this, a megaphone would be useful. He called his dongsing and said he was going to recruit new players. He sounded quite excited and couldn't believe it, saying they didn't even have enough money to keep the current players. He asked how he would buy modules if he managed to get new players. He got mad when he heard the equipment price, and the coach also thought it was expensive. He thought the team was very poor and ordered them to start recruitment immediately. He told them to do it in 3 days. Although the coach thought 3 days was very short, as it was a second division team. The coach needed at least a month, but he informed him that he had a plan and needed it done in 3 days. He approached some reporters and asked if they were working hard. He said he would answer all their questions if they also listened to his request. Soon, one of them raised their hand and asked what the request was. He said the team was publicly recruiting players for 3 days. He told them to write that they were looking for many candidates. The team coach announced that the applications were pouring in. When asked if there were a few, he replied that they'd already surpassed 70. Still, he thought it was unusual since it wasn't transfer season. Placing a stack of papers on the table, he announced that all the applications were there. Seo Muniop started looking through them, saying he would select a few and go straight to the interviews. After the awakening, all superhumans underwent a physical test as required by each nation's association. In the physical test, their strength, agility, and soul ranking were now digitally assessed. This was the test he had taken before, but all these applicants were terrible. However, he couldn't determine potential just by reading that. But anyway, he looked to see if there was at least something useful. Suddenly, something caught his attention. It was the record of a delivery driver, with scores only 1.5 times better than a medalist's. Despite having no notable results in his physical tests, he had powers of object delivery and vision-based transfer, and that was a very interesting power. The day of recruitment arrived, and a young man was the first to be called. He was asked if he had ever participated in high school battlefield matches. Since he hadn't pursued a career and had applied to that team, it was assumed he had changed his mind. The boy said he hadn't changed his mind, he just wanted to meet him personally and get an autograph. At that moment, Seo Muniop showed just how rude a person could be. The boy was embarrassed and asked how he could treat someone like that who had come specifically to see him. Then he asked if he knew what would happen if he told the public how he was treated. At that moment, he got a stapler to the forehead, and Yeep told him to go tell whoever he wanted. Furious, he called for the next person to enter. Those waiting outside saw the boy being carried out of the interview room, and they got a bit nervous. The next candidate was Jo Sungo, who was asked to please come in. He introduced himself formally and showed a lot of respect. The coach asked how he made it to the interview with stats like that, and he asked the owner why he was even there. He quickly began assessing the young man just by looking at him, as he thought his strength and agility were low. But he had 3 superpowers: aura expansion, vision-based transfer, and object delivery. The most interesting one was aura expansion. It was rare and had a high level of tactical utility. With such an interesting superpower, he hadn't even mentioned it in the description. He really didn't know he had awakened it. He also noticed that he was the same age as Lee Naeon. He had a plan and thought it was destiny's doing. He called Joe Sungo and asked if he had written that he was a delivery driver by profession. He asked if he had any battlefield experience. He replied that he didn't and had only worked as a delivery driver. He asked if there was a reason he'd listed on the form, looking at his stats, that he was fit to be a player. He commented that he knew his skills were poor, but since he was young, he had wanted to become a player. At that time, he used his low ratings as an excuse not to even try. He applied to prove everyone else wrong. For that reason, he had some questions. He asked if he could use his delivered item even if he was far away. He mentioned that he had tried and succeeded in reaching about 2.5 kilometers just by focusing. He knew that he could currently go up to 3.0 kilometers. He asked how he transferred the item to someone outside of his line of sight. He shared that he could sense the current position of the person using the aura. He explained that it didn't work automatically. He had to search manually. Since he could use skills like recognition, it was more difficult than he thought. He finally found the nun who could help the little angel. Then he told Joe Sungo that he was in. Neither the boy nor the coach could believe it. That boy was going to be a great match for Lee Naeon. He informed them that from that moment on, the team would play around the two of them. The celebration was for the new beginning. They were happy. The players and the coach were drinking and eating some barbecues. Looking at everyone there, he thought that, despite being quite clumsy, they created a great atmosphere. Someone arrived and introduced himself as the captain of industries. He noticed he was the guy he saw playing in the previous match. Observing, he knew he wasn't diverse, as he was a standard tank, and his stats were too good for that team. He took the chance to express his gratitude, as he noticed he was investing a lot in the team's development. He thanked him and asked for several instructions from then on. He liked the captain's commitment, the perfect key to lead. He observed two people talking. He noticed that Lee Naeon was great at making friends. Then he called the two over since they would be a pair. He asked if the two already knew each other, given that the new team player was also the same age as her. He informed them that they would be a pair from that moment, so they should keep getting to know each other. He explained that one would be the little angel and the other would be a gothic nun. Sungo would be the nun. He said that was all, and the details would come later. He was satisfied because he had finally managed to establish at least the basic structure of the team. And lastly, he really needed to name that place. He called for the attention of everyone present, announcing that he would change the team's name. He told them the team's new name. 3 months later, previously known as Hanjong Industries, from that day forward, it would be called YSN, and he hoped it would be a turning point for them, for it had been some time since the team's owner, Seo Muniap, had taken over. But there hadn't been a major change in the main team. However, new players had finally entered the field. He told everyone just to play as practiced, especially Sungo. He was wondering if it would really work. Seo told him not to worry, that it would be a spectacle. He commanded them to go out there and show them who was in charge. The match YSN vs Incheon BC began. Yeep invited Jo Felman's assistant to watch his team right from the start. She spoke poorly of Baek Jiho and Baek Haeyeon. He found it pathetic on her part. To lighten the mood, he asked about his team. He told her they would witness an extremely intriguing match. The dungeon for the first match was the Sorcerer's Gorge, which would require a lot of mobility and adaptability from the players. 3 months ago, they were training a 100m sprint in 3.01. Player Lee Naeon has an incredible talent for running. Meanwhile, player Jo Sungo was also becoming faster. The coach said it was amazing who had discovered Mr. Baek Jiho. Player Lee Naeon would start to show results just by correcting her running posture. 40 days of training had passed, and 10 days before the match, the effects of the training were already noticeable. It was as calculated by Yeep. The player showed great aptitude. He was like a very useful zoning player after the training, with the player asking the rival team how it went. The team captain said their hunting efficiency had been cut in half. Yeep was talking to Lee Naeon, saying her performance was great and her movements were excellent. As expected, Lee Naeon was very excited by the praise. Though she always responded with a smile, she was very anxious, for she could be an essential player. It was still hard to believe. She wasn't sure she could do it. She was very nervous and doubting her own abilities. However, the captain said it was normal to be nervous in the debut match. He shared that he did poorly in his debut match. He told Lee Naeon she could be nervous if she wanted but not to doubt her abilities. Smiling, he mentioned that the captain of the 7 heroes believed in her, so the opposing team's morale would be shattered. Those words of encouragement gave her a lot of courage. They were the team playing with the weight of the hero Seo Muniap's name, and would have a match worthy of it. Then, the plan would be put into action. Now, YSM began to move in 3 groups, employing the 4-4-3 strategy. But the group of 3 wasn't hunting, they were just running through the dungeon, and so they continued running, with Lee Naeon leading. The group of people suddenly stopped after moving for quite a while. One of them asked for a minute. He bent down and picked up a rock, as it seemed sufficient. and he began using his superpower to deliver objects. He observed his target and took on the role of reconnaissance using the mechanics of object delivery activation. In this way, he was able to locate Park Jong-hyuk, Choi Young-gil, Yoon Yu-dae, and Im Jae-wook. He knew the perfect location of where they were. After that, it was Lee Na-yeon's turn to do her job. It didn't take long before she set out to where the four were, with her acrobatic movements, using her skill to evade. However, she was startled at first, as it looked like a war zone. When she found them, they were fighting against several dragons. She said everything would be fine. None of them could catch her that easily. Everyone was deeply focused on their hunts. She was satisfied because they were almost able to maintain their focus until the end. When an arrow struck their prey, Lee Na-yeon was very pleased to hit the arrow on the first try. Several of them were annoyed because their hunting points had already been stolen. Jae-wook was chosen to deal with the archer. He was in front of her, and all he had to do was use his ability. However, thinking he had managed to capture her, he struck his blow. He realized she was no longer there and asked where he was looking. He began to chase her, saying she was ahead of him. Very upset, he asked how she dared to play with him, and he didn't even notice when she jumped above him. However, her landing plan was obvious, and now he was going to catch her. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't match her speed. She told him he couldn't, as he was too slow, and this time she really managed to infuriate him. The commentators were thrilled because Lee Na-yeon was dominating the players' competition. They were getting nervous because she was really fast, but they knew her arrow count had a limit. However, she requested more arrows. She had just received more arrows thanks to Jo Sung-go's superpower. And thanks to a power like that, the player had gained prominence in just 3 months. While effort was halted all around, he was just focused on reading about his idol. They noticed his effort was minimal, as he was even reading Manhwa. A few weeks ago, in Ysem Team's game, the players in training had already been robbed 3 times. Some said there was no need to keep talking, as there was nothing to be done since she was so fast. And on top of that, she kept playing with them while performing those maneuvers. Yeep didn't think he would have issues placing Lee Na-yeon in a game like that. However, player Sung-go was still a problem. He was taking a while to enter a safe place. He thought about what they should do. It would be difficult for Na-yeon to gather supplies before finding an ideal location. That's when he came up with the idea to appoint Namkung Juhun as Sung-go's bodyguard. And since he was protecting, he would be able to save him from monsters, and it seemed Sung-go had already found a spot. He was placing the arrows somewhere, and they were disappearing. This made Yeep and the coach curious. Yeep said he would just keep doing it all the time, as he couldn't move on his own. He would stay put until someone came to fetch him. Wouldn't it be boring if he just did that? He thought that wouldn't work, as it would get boring. It would be much better to be funny. That's when Jo Sung-go was reading a manhwa. It wasn't like he just wanted to stay put until someone came to get him. Commentators reported that a bizarre scene was happening at that moment. It looked like everything was crumbling while the player just laid down and kept reading. That scene was really impactful and caught a lot of attention. The fans thought the team had gone crazy after changing the team owner. He was lying down until he heard that Lee Na-yeon needed more arrows, so he picked them up and transported them. This was enough to make Seo Muniap burst into laughter. His companion also found it very funny and asked if he had also requested that he do that. He said he feared his own ability, choosing talented players like that. However, he was upset because he had told Baek Ji-ho to leave Shim Yangsu aside. His guest said she didn't know much about her husband's work, but she had heard something about that player. Seo said it was easy to solve that. It was just a matter of threatening and resolving with a bit of violence. The commentators said that while everyone was distracted, player Jo Sung-go, 2 players from Incheon found themselves in a fight, and player Lee Na-yeon was in danger. They surrounded her in an attempt to catch her. She was warned that she only needed to match the attack. She just had to follow that route while escaping. She said okay, that she could do it, and she was right. Then, using her speed, while everyone yelled not to let her escape and to catch her, she was still scared, as it was her first time facing the DPS from the other team. But she just remembered the words of that team's captain and Seo Muniap. She summoned a courage she didn't know she had. She knew they were all a team, and she needed to be a heroine. She made the most of her ability, going as far as possible, and she kept taunting the others, saying they were too slow and couldn't catch her. As everyone chased her, mission number 1 was to capture her. Lee Na-yeon was flawless with her speed and acrobatic tricks. She was slipping away from them. However, some were getting very close to her. There was no more time to waste. They needed to catch her because the hunting points were too far apart. When she stopped, they thought she could no longer escape. One of them, smiling, told her to look back and asked if she thought she was self-sufficient. He asked if she really thought she could jump from that height. Smiling, somewhat embarrassed and nervous, she herself wondered if she could. Waving at them, she said it seemed like she couldn't escape after all, so she was in big trouble. She said they wouldn't spare her, even if she begged. They didn't understand what she was doing and saying, but it didn't matter, because instead, suddenly, her team appeared, and they were all protecting her. Now calmer, with the help of her teammates, she said they wouldn't spare anyone either. And the taunts continued, even as she put on a cute and happy face. Seo Muniop's guest was incredulous because the synchronicity was perfect. The commentators went wild too. Incheon BC had just lost the hunting moment. They would have to face the opposing team right then, and it seemed like they couldn't do anything. The remaining players from Incheon BC finally arrived, but it was too late. The surprising thing was that the team with the lowest ranking, YSN, won the first game 9-0. Players Lee Naeon and Jo Sungo were a shocking combination, and everyone wanted to know what the future held. The fans of that team were praising the two of them. Lee Naeon could also see that Seo Muniop was there. He told her to remember what he had said, and he pointed at her, saying he would make her an essential player. At that moment, she could believe his words because they were coming true. The first match ended with YSN's victory. Everyone found that result shocking. Incheon BC started to fall apart quickly. Even in the second match, Lee Naeon and Jo Sungo dominated and taunted fantastically, as in the previous match. At that pace, they won the first and second matches, taking a 2-0 lead, and finished the second match without any losses. And the MVP of that match was YSN's player, Lee Naeon, who happily thanked the person who believed in her talent. And that news became a headline and graced several magazine covers. It was also on various portals and sites, although it was natural for Lee Naeon to get more attention. Jo Sungo was also recognized for his ability to break the opponent's mentality. But the person who had predicted and contributed to that combo was in the spotlight for Yeep's genius. A few days later, Baek Jiho wanted to know if he had really discovered those two. That's when his friend asked if they would perform well if they were placed on the national team. He was upset because he still hadn't spoken with Choi Hyuk, as he hadn't put him in the tank position yet. He simply shared that he hadn't managed to convince him to take that particular role. Smiling, he said, to be honest, most coaches didn't get along with him. Yeep was angry that they would say such a thing about his friend. He wanted to see if they had the guts to say it to his face. Baek Jiho thought no one would be able to say anything in front of him because he would punch everyone. Then, he asked how much Choi Hyuk cost. As Baek was stunned and didn't answer, he asked again. And the news kept pouring in about him. 5 consecutive victories with no difficulties. The coach of that team was very pleased, as it was the first time since its founding that this was happening. He was so happy he even cried, experiencing a day like that with the team. Yeep asked why he was making so much noise. He was satisfied because the online community had gone crazy over Neon's name. Seo Muniop said he was always right. He said the key point for zoning was Jo Sungo, and that Maria de Sinho should have noticed that already. He then said they should protect Sungo. Seo said he wasn't completely useless. He ordered more water to be brought. She looked back and saw the scenery he was creating. Smiling at her coach, she thought they should be able to keep up the winning streak. They would raise the win rate until the end of the first half of the season. Hearing this, the coach was shocked because 50% was a high goal. The coach was surprised, as the previous win rate had been 31%. How would he reach 50%? The captain thought that achieving a 50% win rate with the old team would be impossible. But looking at him, he seemed stubborn in his opinions, and in fact, he said this after calculating everything. The captain remembered that he had only managed to become a battlefield player with the support of the former team. Although the name had changed, it was still the same, and he felt he owed them his gratitude. Yeep said that since everyone was there, he couldn't keep bothering the Dongsing. Then he climbed on the table to grab everyone's attention, saying he had something to tell them. He told them that if they raised the win rate to 50% before the halfway point of the season, he would invest heavily in the team as well. He said that if they showed their potential, he would also do his part. Then he left, as he didn't like such things, and went ahead. He knew that the distance at which Sungo could send objects and determine the location was limited to 3.0 kilometers. He knew he needed to improve resources if he wanted to use the strategy, and he also needed to conduct 11 versus 11 practice matches. On the other hand, as they recently gained sponsors, they had some money to spend. The problem was that the more he thought about it, the more he wanted Choi Hyuk and his team. Baek sent him a message saying he could check the youth league. Yeep thought Jiho was quite useful sometimes. He was almost certain that recruitment could start after the first half of the season. And YSM's winning streak ended with 6 victories. As predicted, the other teams figured out a method to counter the combo. The team that had fluctuated found balance with their captain, No Young-won, in charge. And that team started in last place in a league of 20 teams, with 18 matches, 10 wins, and 8 losses. They rose 9 positions in the ranking, moving to 11th place. Sip was going to scout some players in the youth league. However, he said he didn't have a specific goal for that visit. He was just looking around. Even so, he was warmly welcomed, and the facilities were excellent, even if it was just a club activity. It seemed something had really caught his attention. It was that boy. The person in charge there thought he was good because he genuinely recognized a great talent. He was going to join a KB1 League team, Future Phoenix, soon. But when he saw himself excited over an average status of 77, he realized his standards had dropped. However, he was looking for someone with an average of 90% in the hidden stats among those who hadn't been recruited yet. He had begun the operation to find talent. He looked all around, and the person in charge was showing him everything. However, they noticed that the bigger teams had already picked up the good players. Either someone had arrived late, or someone hadn't been evaluated yet. It was a young man who was late because he was preparing for college entrance exams. Then he started watching the young man, whom he initially began calling Airhead. Using his observation, he realized that he was a player too, so he would give it a try. When he asked if any team wanted to recruit him, the young man said there wasn't a single team interested in him. He also said it was an honor, as he was a fan, and very politely asked if he wanted a handshake. However, he seemed a bit shy, as he had said he hit fans. Yeep said it would be fine. He said that since he would sign a contract with him, everything was okay. The young man heard the word contract, and almost fell backward. However, the young man had a talent that caught attention, a superpower that needed certain conditions to activate. He considered the level of the Korean League and could live comfortably just by using that superpower. So, he needed to sign a contract with that boy before someone else took him. The boy said he was very grateful but asked what he knew that made him want to recruit him. He had to think of a response, as he couldn't say it was based on matches since he spent the whole league on the bench. He said he was just curious as to why a boy like him would be on the bench, and he said he thought he might have a hidden talent that no one knew about yet. The boy looked sad and said he might have misunderstood him. Seo said it was no problem, he could trust him. He said he had a superpower, and that he could see it. He talked about the number of powers he could sense. However, he was upset because he didn't know why such a superpower could exist. It was explained that superpowers awakened according to the user's characteristics. He said they also had the potential to become stronger depending on how much effort was put in. I felt that the superpower could evolve even further. If he wanted, he could even make a bet to start playing on his team for 2 years. He told him that if he ended up giving up, he'd pay 300 million won for his lost time. Another person said, however, that he need to ask his mother first. So he took the boy and asked him to hop on the motorcycle because he would take him to ask his mother. On the motorcycle, he rode as fast as he could, and he showed the contract to his mother, managing to convince her to sign it. He was very pleased because everything was going so well. Now he would move on to the next. He was curious to see what kind of talent he might find at the next school. The following week, all the students had already signed their contracts. He thought he had plenty of schools left. He visited several places and still hadn't found anyone good. He was upset because this was the last school, and he hadn't saved anyone for a demonstration. He decided to take one more look since it was the last school, and then he'd head home. The player he was interviewing said he was sorry, but he had no intention of becoming a player. The person in charge said there was no point in insisting. The boy had already received offers from several places and hadn't accepted any. He asked if his parents agreed with him, and the boy said no, because if he made a lot of money, he'd know he should be concerned about others since it was his life. He knew the issue was because he had an illness. He said he wanted to be a writer who gifted people with hope and dreams. He told him that, by chance, the person standing in front of him was Seo Muniap, the legendary hero. He mentioned that, to be honest, it had been some time since his biography was published. He then commented that he even thought of telling what happened in the final dungeon that no one knew about. But of course, he would only share it if he joined his team. At that moment, the young man said he would sign the contract. He stated that the contract fee was 210 million, with an annual salary of 72.5 million and a 3-year contract. He realized that he was definitely more expensive compared to UBM. The young man had one more question, something he wanted to ask. He asked if he was weak. It was the first time he had seen someone like him. He said he had seen the French national team enter, and none of them were as incredible as him. Seo Muniap wanted to know what he was getting at with that conversation. He asked him to stop right there, as he didn't have a hobby of distracting people at random. He said he wouldn't play, and that was all. Now he was satisfied because he could move on to the main event. He called Baek Jiho and asked if he was busy. He asked if he had found some players. He said not all of them had been taken. He said he would make one more visit and then return. When Baek Jiho asked where he would visit, Yeep replied, where else could it be? At the Sangsung Spirits Club. He had gone there to meet the team's coach. However, they weren't letting him in. They said it wasn't a place he could just walk into like that. He remembered that at the Blue House, they had also tried to stop him. After trying and failing, he just informed the head coach that he'd done his best. But he couldn't prevent him from entering. He really liked the environment, which was very rich and beautiful. Everywhere he looked, those facilities were much better than his team's. His team's facilities were only suitable for walking exercises. He was walking around when he heard his name. He turned to see who it was. The leader of that club heard what he was doing there and came over. He asked if he was the one responsible for player transfers and recruitment. After telling him that it was Coach Choi Dong-ju who handled everything, Yeep didn't seem pleased. And the man in front of him thought he'd have to act cautiously, as he'd heard that this guy was a ticking bomb. Seo said he would like to talk about the transfer of a player, Choi Hyuk. He didn't want to imagine the chaos if this guy spoke to the coach directly. Yeep insisted that he wanted to speak to the coach anyway and asked to be guided to where he was. Seo Muniop wasn't stopped and followed the coach. He said he was there to negotiate as a businessman and asked if he was Coach Choi Moon-sung. He introduced himself and didn't even look at him. Seo Muniop noticed he was trembling a lot. Then, when he looked closely at him, he realized he'd seen him before. He looked again and said he looked familiar. The player asked why the coach had called him there. Yeep asked who was saying it was Yun Jayak, captain of the Sangsung Spirits. The coach said he called the captain because he also had the right to know about what was happening with the players. Seo Muniop saw no problem with that. However, he started staring at the coach in a strange way. He wondered if he had seen him somewhere before. The coach was sweating as he said he had never seen him before and thought he was mistaken. He had seen him before, but couldn't remember exactly. However, the coach said they should proceed with the negotiation. It was then that he seemed to recall and said he would dive into the depths of his memories. He tried to remember, but had a bad memory. The coach said there was no need to bother with his bad memory. Yeep was inclined to remember, but no matter how hard he tried, he didn't think they knew each other from everyday life. Suddenly, he gave a look and said the word, dungeon. Then he said he would never forget someone who had irritated him in a dungeon. He said it was in 1993, in the Temple of the Vengeful Spirit, and he was very angry about it. He said the coach had tried to eliminate him after the dungeon raid began. Was he simply going to let it go now? That senator thought he had grown a mustache after hearing that he had returned. In the year 1993, at Seoul Station, at the unexplored dungeon gate, the Temple of the Vengeful Spirit, Seo Muniap was recounting that there were many traps inside the dungeon, so they had to be careful. When someone asked him to wait, he said that, with so many people there, it made sense to say it would be difficult. However, there was a method to complete the raid faster. Why were they making that detour? That Choi Moon-sung, at 24 years old, said that if Seo Muniap couldn't do it, he could easily lead. He said that just having done a few dungeons wasn't enough. One also needed to understand strategy. That day, Jin-tae was with him, trying to hold him back from attacking the other. Jin-tae asked him to calm down and prioritize the dungeon raid. He said he would come to him after the dungeon hard mode. He told him offensive words. He said that something like a dungeon raid would be nothing difficult for him. While Seo Muniap kept his cool and alternated between ranks to maintain his position, the brazen Choi Moon-sung came in all high and mighty, saying that, for now, he had time and was advancing so slowly. There was no need to listen to that guy saying strange things. He was bragging about how amazing he was when he fell into one of them. He put several people in danger due to his carelessness, having to be saved by the one he had previously insulted. They informed the raid leader that the path ahead was completely blocked. Choi Moon-sung was there just to disturb the people who wanted to go about their lives. Yeep, very upset, said he'd see that worm outside. He remembered how painful it was to see him after the dungeon was over. He could remember that time when he felt his bones aching, so he told him he didn't know what he was talking about, and he asked what he would do. Yeep said he didn't need to be that scared. He asked if he really thought he would seek revenge for something that happened so long ago, and he said that, for a better conversation, it was best for the two of them to leave there. He said that if he wanted the others to listen, he really didn't mind. Calmly, he asked the two of them to step outside because he had something to discuss with that gentleman. Seo Muniap said that it was he who had ignored orders and only talked about nonsense from textbooks. He was the one who had extended the dungeon raid time by 9 hours after doing what he shouldn't have done. Choi said that back then he was very young and immature. However, what happened in the past stayed there. He also said that after the raid ended, he took his revenge. He also said that, after all, he had forgotten about it. Then he told him it was fine if he hit him for something that happened in the present. And, as he said, he had done something wrong and should take the consequences. However, he wasn't worried, as he went easy on older folks. The coach was in a panic, asking what he had done wrong. Then he asked if it wasn't precisely him who had taken the initiative to make the player change. He said he should know well who Baek Ji-ho had listened to for that change. Then he said he'd give up on hitting him, and would do the same thing he had done. He asked if he was planning to leak the story of what had happened between them to every reporter he knew. Choi threatened to sue him. He said he didn't do things like that, and would find him in person. Terrified and panicked, he wanted to know why he was doing this. Then he told Choi Hyuk. He said his contract only had 1 more year, so he would need to let him go. Yeep mentioned that the player also wanted to change positions, but he was being prevented. The coach thought that, either way, he had other players to replace him at any time. However, the transfer fee would be 1.5 billion. When he heard that, he even laughed and said he'd been thinking about it on his way there. He said he could pretend he didn't see it if he handed over the player a bit cheaper. He realized he wasn't joking. Then he said he'd let him go for 1.3 billion. Yeep said his life was only worth 200 million. The coach said it was 600 million, and he couldn't go any lower. Then he said 100 million was the final offer. He asked to forget everything and start fresh. After that favorable deal, Seo Muniap was even calling Choi Moo-sung, "Sir," and he said he trusted him as well. The coach looked at him and thought he was a devilish guy, but at least everything worked out. However, the coach couldn't have known that at the time. A few days later, Choi Hyuk arrived at his new team. He was welcomed by Seo Muniap, who said that from that moment, that would be his new team, and he would be the new tank. Choi Hyuk had a salary in the range of 800 million and a 5-year contract. The news was that player Choi Hyuk from Sangsung Spirits had been transferred to Wysen, and the final transfer fee was just under 70 million. He thought that after getting 3 more players, they wouldn't need to stay with just 18. He just didn't know where the good players were hiding. It was then that Baek Hae-yeon walked in and asked why he had been working so hard in those recent days. He also said that she had been quite busy, as Mrs. Sungi was sad about barely seeing her. He noticed she had a book in her hands and asked what it was about. He realized she was trying to learn French in a quick and practical way. He noticed that, during the time he was away, the world had improved a lot, and there were already books to make it easier. She thought French was very difficult, so she asked him to go to France with her. He asked what she was talking about when she mentioned France. He was told that all procedures in Korea were finished. During the first half, Baek Hae-yeon got accustomed to the position change and achieved the highest kill count. Showing interest in Baek Hae-yeon for a long time, the Moro brothers never missed the chance to send an official offer. And after finalizing the contract with Paris Lumiere, she was eager to debut in the European League. So that was why she was trying to learn French. He had been so busy recently that he even missed the news about her. Jake Ladd informed him that the conversation with Hae-yeon was over, and it was time to talk about Seo Muniap. He said he should go as Miss Beck's translator. They also said they would give him a personal gift. Then he remembered that on the day he met them, they said they would give him a gift. Now he recalled it was something about a special weapon made for him. He said he was too busy to go abroad at that moment. He was thinking about increasing the number of players he had. He said he wasn't at the level to ask for help from an agent like him. He was at a neighborhood competition level. He asked about looking for players in Paris. He mentioned that Korea allowed each club to have 5 foreign players per team. The idea of recruiting foreigners crossed his mind. It seemed like an interesting idea, so he decided he would go to Paris. He arrived in Paris and was quite determined to find new players. He thought it had been a long time since he last went. Paris would be better if Jiho had also gone. Seo said he couldn't help, as he was too busy with work, so he'd leave him at home. However, there were also many reporters after him. It was always like that. No matter where he was, reporters followed him. To welcome him, one of the Moro brothers was there. Seo Muniap was wondering why there were so many reporters, but when he heard, he understood the reason. It wouldn't be good for a new player like Miss Hae-yeon to miss out on a lot of attention. He suggested that, since he was there, why not give an interview with Baek Hae-yeon? He said he had only visited places because of dungeons, and this was his first leisure trip. He said that even though he had received an offer, he currently had no intention of becoming a player. They asked him, since he was in France, if he had plans to meet the partner of the 7 heroes. He said he'd heard that he was living somewhere in the countryside after finding a wife. He said that if he went to Paris, he wanted to meet him. He mentioned that he was smart, and thought he would end up homeless after having his fortune stolen. However, he himself was hearing about him on the news. He couldn't believe that Seo Muniap was in France. Someone asked where he was going, as he just started off quickly. He jumped into the ocean, saying he had to take care of something and would be back in France. At the Paris Lumiere Club, the brothers were thrilled to have them all there. They thought it would be amazing if he signed a contract with them. However, he replied that Baek Hae-yeon would be playing in his place, so they should take good care of her. He was interested in him taking the physical test as well, as he thought there was still time to do the final test. He told him that, since he was there, he could sign the copy of the heroism manhwa in which he was the main character. He asked them to stay quiet and noted that he knew he'd act this way, so he was already prepared. Baek Hae-yeon was ready to start the test. They asked if she was comfortable in her outfit, and she quickly responded that she was. Then she went straight into the physical test. They requested that she please defeat all the summoned monsters in front of her. The time limit would be 1 minute, so she began to do as they asked. She focused and quickly started destroying the enemies. For her, it wasn't difficult since she was already well trained. The test ended, and for her, it was fun. She knew her record was 22 seconds. She asked the coach how she had done, and they thought she was amazing. They were excited about her because her movements were better than expected. Yeep knew it would be much better than anticipated, as her potential was incredible. At 24, she was in a growth period as a superhuman. Since he gave her the perfect formula to improve, the coaches there should be excellent. Although her skill level was a bit low, her superpowers would be good. They hired a player of her caliber for only 4 million euros and thought they were very lucky. Someone was looking for Seo Muniap. A mother and daughter couldn't believe what they were seeing. Yeep thought that this guy was the key. He was in the top 3 of the best Battlefield players. He remembered saying he wanted to know if he was as fast as Jiho. However, he didn't expect to meet him like this. In 2005, after Seo Muniap and the 7 heroes completed their final raid, many superhumans gave up their weapons and began to retire when the war came to an end. Afterward, Seo Muniap would be considered the strongest superhuman at that time. This was the most talked about question in the modern entertainment world, with many names mentioned. But there was one specific person mentioned in every debate. The star of the French national team, the 3rd strongest team in the world, the player of the year, Nathan Berner. The brothers and agents wanted to know why he was there, as it was his day off. Yeep wondered what was wrong with that man, who kept staring at him that way. Then Nathan said he was there just to welcome the new teammate, and he greeted her. However, she didn't understand anything and asked her mother what he had said, and she said she didn't speak French either. She greeted him, saying it was a pleasure to meet him. Yeep thought he looked like a country boy, different from Walker, but didn't know why he looked at him that way. But since he would be Hane's teammate, he shouldn't be rude. He thought it was a surprise attack and was already prepared to counter. In fact, he only wanted a hug. He didn't know what was wrong with that person. He said he was happy to see him in Paris. However, it had been a long time since he felt so confused. After that, Nathan said it was a bit embarrassing to be praised by someone he had admired since childhood. In fact, he was only praising him because he was one of the strongest. He wasted no time and quickly looked at all the abilities he had. Excluding endurance, his potential was over 90 in all attributes. His superpower was also extremely annoying. After he used that superpower, it would become a cheat, as his attributes would increase for 2 individuals. Now that was insane. He even had the potential to increase his attributes further. With so much technique, he should be highly proficient in combined attacks just by using his clone. An 81 in endurance wasn't a weakness either. It was the highest endurance among the elite tanks in Korea. What would happen if he faced Gerald Walker after increasing his attributes? That fight would be quite fun to watch. That's why people invest in Battlefield. But if Nathan fought against Walker, who would win? He was curious. Nathan asked if he had already made peace with Gerald Walker. Yeep wanted to know why he was asking. He said it wasn't really a fight, he just showed him the true potential of the level. However, he was fighting even though he was younger, thought it was brave, and decided to give him a little help. He asked if he was saying that he dominated him while fighting. He mentioned that the news didn't cover wins and losses, so it ended after a few rounds. Nathan found it hard for anyone to defeat him in a fight. Yeep said it was simply possible because he was just human. The brothers said that, to show skills and offer valuable advice, a little lamb had doubted him. To become a player who could stand up to his opponent in the future. That was the true intellect that the hero who saved the world displayed. Nathan kept wondering if Seo Muniap had defeated Walker. Even he avoided a direct confrontation with Walker as much as possible. He thought about the confrontation that Seo Muniap would be. He thought it would be impossible to fight him, as he was considered dead. But now that he had returned, he wanted to fight him no matter what. Yeep, observing his gaze, thought he had won over a lot of girls. Then he told Baek Haeyeon to be careful around him. He probably had many girls around. Then her mother intervened and asked what her type would be. She said she liked guys who were a bit rough but brave. He thought he could be rough and brave. Her mother thought it was better not to, as that type of guy got into a lot of trouble. But she said it didn't matter. She would handle her own love life. The only connection he managed to make was with Walker. However, he didn't think dating someone like him was a good idea. Beck mentioned she would go out with her mother to buy some things. Nathan said he would accompany the two. Yeep said he would leave them in his hands. He was pleased because it was him who went out with them, as he thought going to the mall was a bit much. Then the brothers called him over to deliver the item they would give him as a gift. Yeep looked around and observed where they were going. It looked like they were in some kind of smithy. The artisans were there, but no one was paying attention to them. The brothers explained that these were the weapons created in their workshop. Yeep could see that there were many, and they were very beautiful. He picked one up and said it was great. He had used all types of weapons, from the worst to the best. The brothers were pleased, as he knew well how to distinguish the quality of weapons. Before the weapons market began to grow with the creation of Battlefield, though they had only tried to take care of the artisans who worked with them during their lives. He thought that those destined for success were successful in everything. They were very happy, as one day someone like him had arrived. Then there was a panel on the wall with various pieces of what looked like a spear. He asked if it was for him, and they said yes, he could attest to it. He wanted to know how to use it, as he didn't see a button. Then they said he would have to put his aura into the spear. When he did this and released his aura, he realized how magnificent the spear was. He said that the foldable spear he had used before was impressive. He noticed there was a lot of detailed work in it, but it would be a bit less durable than his previous accessories. However, he would only use a fake one on the battlefield. For him, it was fine, as there were no more dungeons anyway. He thought he could use it forever if he took good care of it. He asked if they reached that level of weapons just to gift him. They said it was made for him but wouldn't be used only by him. If it was a spear used by him, they would sell replicas in abundance. They explained that, in other words, the weapon they were providing was like a sponsorship. There was no problem with it, so they calculated his payment through sponsorship. If he accepted, they would pay him 1.5 million euros per year for 5 years. And if he participated in a match, whether official or not, they would pay him an additional 3 million euros for each game he participated in. They asked him what he thought. Although the hero Seo Muniop might have had his decline, he would take his role as club owner seriously. It was too much money to refuse. After asking if he had read the entire contract, they asked if he had read Article 2, including Clause 1, which stipulated that he would take care of the weapon and not discard it. They also asked if he wasn't currently a battlefield player. They mentioned that the weapons currently used by superhumans could only be kept by players. They told him he had immunity, but the weapon wouldn't pass through customs. They said they had a solution for that. Since he couldn't because he wasn't a battlefield player, all he needed was to become a player. Mother and daughter had already returned from shopping with several bags. He was happy because he hadn't gone. However, he was quiet, sitting in a corner. A few hours earlier, he thought it was very easy to become a player. He said he would have to register with his country's association. Since each nation's player registration was managed by the World Association, it didn't matter in which country he registered. Since he had already registered the avatar before, a representative could register him. He only realized he'd fallen for the trick after it was too late. Now, because of those clever folks, he was registered as a battlefield player. He had to watch them skipping around in front of him because they had managed to trick him. That was their specialty, and they did it masterfully. They mentioned that they would never put him in danger. They had most of his collection items from his house. They had the car and even items from when he was 17. They had even bought the diary he stopped using after 4 days. The more they talked, the more irritated he became. Now, he was playing in a corner because he would participate in amateur games now and then if he needed money. However, now he was registered as an actual player. They appeared and said that now that he was a player, why not sign a contract with them? Angry, he asked if they wanted him to test his new weapon on them. She thought it would be cool to have him as a player on her team. She said she wanted to try teaming up with him, like her father did back in the day. For her, that might have been something from the past, but for him, it was only a few months ago. Someone mentioned that he heard he had a new rival, Nathan. He said it was the bald guys who challenged him, then he said it was like a test. Fortunately, he could have training in the battle simulator in the morning. If he was free and wanted to, he could go. He thought it would be fun if he participated too. Just by looking at Nathan, he could see that he was hiding his competitiveness to the max. And he thought that boy was getting more and more interesting. So he patted him on the shoulder and said he would play a match. The next day, at the Paris Lumiere Club, they were all there training peacefully, and Baek Hyeon already wanted to go and defeat everyone. Yeep told her that she would look like a country girl as she was the only one eager there. He said she was just like her father the first time he entered a dungeon. He asked her to look around because they were all calm. The calm ended as soon as they saw him and recognized him. They commented among themselves that he was the strongest person on the planet, as he was immortal, and there was no arguing that. She noticed that everyone got excited when they looked at him. Then one of them came up and said his name. He introduced himself and said, "Chich Lucas, main tank." Yeep just asked what that had to do with him, and thought that if he was provoking, he would get it. However, he was very polite and was just asking for an autograph. Trying to be polite, Yeep signed an autograph so the guy would leave quickly. He pointed to Baek Hyeon and said to take good care of her, as she was part of the team. However, his first impression of that guy was strange, but his personality seemed good. He took the opportunity to look at his attributes, which were monstrous. Even though Nathan was the star of the team, the only one who was almost impossible to handle was Chich Lucas. And from what he could see, he was let go because of marketing, but he was someone who could compete for the top 3. However, it would have been great if he weren't a tank. Of course, all his superpowers were focused on that. Nathan asked if he had already talked to Chich. He mentioned that he was an incredible player outside of battle, leading a charity group that protects trees worldwide. Sip thought that might be why he had that superpower. He asked Nathan if something good had happened. He asked if it was that obvious since he couldn't contain his excitement about turning his dream into reality. He said he always wanted to surpass the hero who saved the world as a superhuman of the new generation. He wasn't just someone to be respected but also an obstacle that needed to be overcome. But he had died in a final dungeon, so he thought it would just be a dream he would never realize. Sip asked if he wanted to defeat him. Nathan said humans are dreamers. He said that as long as he lived, he would fight for his dream and do his best in battle. So it would be good for both of them to try their best. And there were the two brothers again, putting on a show. The coach of the Paris Lumiere BC team was also there. He told them to get to the point and form teams. He wanted to see it because normally, the two main ones forming teams were Chich and Nathan. He said that this time they could form the teams themselves. He asked if they wanted him to form a balanced team with strengths and positions. He said not at all. They had a special method for creating simulated game teams. It was rock paper scissors, and that's how they chose the team. Seo Muniap would be on the same team as Chich and Lucas. Nathan's team was also balanced, and now that the two teams were ready, they could start playing. Everyone was gathered and ready to start the match. The arena was wide and open, allowing them to see the other team. He noticed it was a dungeon where they couldn't use the terrain to their advantage. It was clear they had put him there to fight against Nathan, but if they wanted to fight, he would certainly fight. They announced that they had 60 seconds to strategize with their formations. Yeep began organizing the formations. Chich would be the main tank and should be very familiar with that position. He told the blonde guy that he would be the frontline tank, and the red-haired woman would be the secondary tank. He told everyone they would play around the frontline tank while the main tank charged forward. Chich was happy because it seemed like he knew the team very well, and what he just said was simply the standard formation. He even said he had chosen the players perfectly. They'd agree if he said he was interested in their club. He himself would mark Nathan, because he'd probably do the same. Chich was very excited about it, not knowing if he could even focus on the match. With the positions already set, they should observe their opponents. He noticed they had twin daggers as weapons. It was really an annoying weapon to face. When people use twin daggers, they usually have a higher attack rate with their dominant hand. He was curious, was Nathan left-handed or right-handed? The countdown to the start of that training match began. Then they were told they could start the battle. Yeep thought that those mere mortals could give it their all. The club owner knew that Nathan was ambidextrous, and everyone thought they should know, as he had researched it. The club owner thought it would be hard for him to face Nathan. Nathan's attack patterns always changed, and that's why players with good observational skills suffered even worse defeats. He thought he'd have a chance to announce Nathan as someone who defeated Seo Muniap. Meanwhile, the battle was intense. Players were facing off to see who had the most kills. Now it would be Seo Muniap's turn. They went straight into the clash. Nathan thought that the enemy's spear could easily hit him if the distance between them increased, so he closed the gap as much as he could. But that wasn't the only move. Seo Muniap could finish perfectly. He realized he made a feint. He then positioned himself where he thought he had more freedom. Yeep realized he would have to be more cautious with this young man. Then he had the opportunity to use the 100 centimeters, and launched it. However, Nathan simply dodged as if he already knew where the attack would hit. Nathan also knew he couldn't rest for even a minute, so he charged forward, trying to prioritize attacks and catch him in better positions. The monstrous clash was happening between two great players. It would be very profitable for the Paris team if they could announce that one of their players was the winner. However, defeating the hero who saved the world wasn't going to be easy. The fight continued, and Nathan thought he spotted a slight opening. Seo Muniap blocked it effortlessly. That block left Nathan a bit unsettled. Seo Muniap was becoming increasingly interested in the game and Nathan's reactions. He noticed that Nathan was calm and didn't react to attacks, which showed an opening for approach. He dodged well and attacked when he thought the enemy was about to rest. Yeep knew that speed would be greater if he turned it into a speed battle. However, the guy always caught him by surprise. The movements were fun and acrobatic. He thought that kid's weapon techniques were quite charming. He figured that if the opponent wanted to play, he could too. The fight was taking on massive proportions. The excitement was guaranteed with just the two of them. The blows between them had an almost perfect dynamic. Nathan was also very excited, as the combination of spear and shield was in harmony. If he protected himself from the spear, he'd be hit by the shield, and against the shield, he'd be pierced. On top of that, he didn't let the enemy get out of his attack range. At the same time, he managed to keep a convenient distance for attacking. As expected from Seo Muniap, his skills were divine. He needed to find an opening. Only then would he change the flow of the battle in his favor. Yeep asked if he was done, as he knew the openings in him weren't real. As he imagined, it still wasn't enough to defeat him alone. So he decided to try something else. That's when he realized that Nathan had finally decided to use his power. Using the clone ability consumed half the user's aura to split the body in two. Seo Muniop was eager to see that technique. He was dominating Nathan in terms of technique and weapon. Everyone there noticed this clearly. In studying the fight, they noticed another interesting fact. Seo Muniop probably hadn't prepared for the training. He had fought underground monsters. He hadn't learned to fight humans, only monsters. The association president said that after reaching the true peak of power, the enemy didn't matter. However, they knew that Nathan would now attack him from various directions, and it wouldn't be easy. It seemed that the real confrontation would begin at that moment. Everything leading up to it was just a warm-up. Seo Muniop quickly realized by the speed at which he was being attacked, and also by the directions, as there were now two of them. Both the real Nathan and the clone were perfectly capable of counterattacking. However, he noticed that he was the first to face others who were trying to keep their distance. He was attacked several times without pause, but none of the blows truly hit the target. He was going all out, but he still managed to fend off the strikes. He thought Seo Muniop was both human and monstrous. The skills were incredible. Even fighting against someone like Nathan, he felt no difficulty. Someone who fought in real dungeons against various monsters wouldn't lose to a human. Nathan couldn't see any way to win, but the battle marks on the ground, created when he was pushed back, said something. He thought the opponent was also struggling since he thought he was superior in terms of speed. However, he seemed calm. Maybe he was hiding something. It was easy to admire someone like Seo Muniop. However, Yeep was really having trouble. He thought that kid was stronger than he had expected. He thought he could handle a one-on-one. But with the clone, the situation changed a lot. It would become a long battle, but the problem was that with less information, he was at a disadvantage. The attack timings between the body and the clone were perfect. Using both hands, there was no pause in the attacks. Seo Muniop decided to focus because this wasn't some random monster, but a strong opponent. He couldn't match the speed or figure out the pattern. After focusing, he realized it was just a matter of rolling the dice. He noticed that Nathan was prepared for the next strike and was going all out, just like before. He took advantage and dodged, letting Nathan pass by without even a scratch. His timing was faster than expected. Seo Muniop was prepared for the final strike. However, Nathan sensed his intent and thought he'd forgotten that there were two of him. While he was being attacked, the other could easily strike the opponent, and that's how he lost the arm holding the spear. Everyone watching in the training room was panicking, realizing that he had lost his right arm. They thought that with this, Nathan would be the victor. However, he just thanked him for the act. He mentioned that he had trusted him to attack no matter the circumstances. He said that he'd aimed for that tiny opening. He could hit someone much faster than himself. So he thanked him for trusting that he'd move as he imagined. Nathan watched him speak, surprised at his manner. With one of his daggers pointed at his face, Nathan told Seo Muniop that the battle wasn't over yet. It was then that Chich grabbed his arm, preventing him from continuing the attack. Smiling, he said he would consider it a draw this time, though it was his team that won. He told Nathan that even with all his excitement, he should remember this was a team battle, and that's how Seo Muniop's team won that training match. Nathan asked if he had given up his arm on purpose and mentioned that if it was to destroy something annoying, a clone would be the target. Yes. The coach thought their interpretation of the match was incredible. It was impressive how they marked Nathan in a 2-against-1. Yeep asked if there was another match before this, and the brothers responded happily that there was. He thought that equipping an ambidextrous dual-wielder might help, and he felt he'd be close to learning something if he watched again. They asked if he wanted to review the match against Nathan since he had trained. It was the least they could do. They invited him to follow them to the team's game analysis room. Seeing the person there, he thought he was also a coach since he was with the head coach. So he introduced himself formally and wasted no time, beginning to evaluate the young man before him. He found Gabriel Sana to be someone with multiple attributes. Additionally, he was a superhuman who wasn't a player. He asked what he was doing in the game analysis room, as he was going to review the match footage. They replied that it wasn't so poorly structured, so he didn't need to worry. They used a system called Superhuman Analysis, a program that records all of the game's information. This allowed them to digitize each player's individual skills and areas for improvement. He was surprised at how modern everything was in these times. He said he could only see what he knew about the difference between the equipment they used for teams. He asked if they made those devices themselves. He replied absolutely not, that it was a commercial program. He wanted to know the cost. However, he had already assessed that he didn't need it, but it would be quite beneficial for the coach. He could even imagine the coach's delight was something that gave a panoramic view of the players. But he didn't want to spend 2.5 million euros just to silence Dongju. Then they asked if the brothers wanted to make a deal with him. He would give them his battle data, but they'd have to provide that program. He'd introduce someone who knew how to use it, as he knew his battle data would be worth at least that. The fans also wouldn't want to miss this chance. So they agreed, as they couldn't let that opportunity slip by. He told them they could wait because the second battle would be much more interesting. He thought he could get a lot out of France, a weapon, the player analysis program, and even a coach. But definitely, fighting against humans was quite different. In reality, it was he who fought. It could be different since they weren't trying to kill in a sport. Who would have thought he'd fight in such a relaxed battle? But even so, the fight against Nathan was a lot of fun, and he felt the tension of combat for the first time since he returned. He was undoubtedly the strongest superhuman he had encountered so far. Even so, he couldn't lose to a kid like him. In his self-assessment, he thought that since Nathan was superior in speed and strength, the difference must be in another area. He had found something different because he had never seen that superpower before, the amplifier. Even today, there weren't many powers that were well known. However, with the emergence of many superhumans, some things were proven true. The superpowers of superhumans manifested depending on the individual's natural dispositions, or sometimes they manifested when the aura reacted to an intense experience. A year before Seo Muniap escaped from the orphanage, he had heard that phrase hundreds of times. Just like the scars on his body that refused to disappear, those words still echoed inside his head. He knew the director would pass through that path when he came from the orphanage. He stood at a high place watching as the car made the turn near him. He noticed that the director was already coming. It was that heartless person's car. Without thinking much, he threw the stone at that car. That was his first memory of throwing. The car went off the road and hit a tree, and some people say that revenge is a useless act. But he knew at that moment, when he succeeded in his revenge, that even he was capable of smiling. The next match would start in 5 minutes. Everyone was ready for the amplifier. He knew he'd gain that new power by concentrating while fighting Nathan. At first, he thought it wasn't the ultimate attribute for a human. He wanted to experiment a bit, now that he had a worthy opponent for the next battle. His thoughts were interrupted when Baek Hyeon called out to him. He looked to the side and noticed she was very sad because she hadn't been able to fight properly. She said she wanted to go forward but ended up teleporting. He told her he had already said in the past that advancing could sometimes mean retreating. He reminded her that those guys weren't beginners but a world-class league. He told her not to feel bad. A melee player who doesn't take risks is useless. Then he called her. She was startled, and he asked if she knew why he was so good. She said his physical skill was impressive, but his throwing ability compared to the clones was nothing special. It was announced that the countdown for the new match was beginning. Everyone was prepared, standing still, watching, observing Nathan. Their expressions seemed calm and kind, but when he held a weapon, his expression changed completely. He wanted to face him only after he split into two, so he thought about which attribute he wanted to amplify. But, to be honest, the answer was already decided. Amplify the skill. The battle began, and everyone went at each other. It was a fight among the strongest, and only they would survive it. Beck was trying to focus so as not to mess things up again, but it seemed that, for her, the battle was very intense. Seo Muniap had used the amplifier, but he didn't feel any difference. Perhaps he would feel it once he started fighting, and he was already heading toward his target. It would be that clash again, and both would be better. His opponent was fast and ambidextrous. However, he could hardly wait for the moment when he would split into two to fight him. It didn't take long, and he started using the clone to get away, exactly as he had thought. When he threw the spear, it was faster than before, and it hit the clone, saying he could have dodged the attack even if he changed the trajectory. He hadn't dodged because he thought it wouldn't hit him. That attack was strange, a burst of speed out of nowhere. Nathan found it odd, as he was much faster that time, and he hadn't expected him to have a few tricks up his sleeve. He thought it would be better to create some distance for now, as close combat would be difficult with only 30%. Seo Muniap thought his opponent's decision-making was excellent. As expected of a high-level player, he was very smart. But he seemed very shocked after losing the clone and got distracted. It took him a minute to make the decision, and because of that, the match was over. Our video ends here. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe to the channel. Until next time, bye bye.